Chapter 261. The dozen people here are our original team. You have been with them for a long time. If some of them are smart, you can ask them to be responsible for the newly built venues outside. Of course, it doesn't matter if they are not smart. As long as they are down to earth and willing to work, they can learn these things slowly. Li pinched a piece of osmanthus cake, put it in his mouth, and told his plan to Wan Ruoqing. It's not a solution to live on rewards all the time. In a few days, number the chairs. When they watch the performance in the future, one person will have one ticket, and they will sit according to the number. You can decide the ticket price. The higher the seats are, the more expensive it will be. When all the seats are sold out, start to sell the standing tickets, and the price can be lower. Wan Ruoqing listened carefully and remembered every word he said in her heart. Since ancient times, actors' income had mostly depended on others' rewards. The method of buying tickets before watching the performance had never been heard of. But this was not important. What was important was that this sentence came from his mouth, so it must not be wrong. This method is not necessarily suitable. In short, change it slowly. You know the things here better than I do. You can make your own decisions. Unconsciously, the last piece of osmanthus cake had been eaten. Li Yi stood up, clapped his hands, and said. Wan Ruoqing also stood up, bowed to him seriously, and said, if this method is feasible, I don't know how many people can avoid being homeless. I thank you on behalf of those actors. The matter of recruiting actors will be handed over to you and Mr. Sunday, Li Yi made an obeisance and said. The reason why he did this was that he also wanted to change the current situation of this industry and let those actors live a better life, but it was more because of his own selfishness. But in any case, a win-win result was always good. He was used to being a hands-off boss. After handing this matter to Wan Ruoqing, he didn't intend to take care of it anymore. She was also an actor, so she was the most suitable candidate for this matter. When he walked out of the brothel and passed by Rui Square, suddenly a figure rushed out from the side and grabbed his arm. Lord Commandant, you're finally here. Li Yi was startled, thinking that it was someone from the Green Forest who had come to seek revenge. Just as he was about to struggle free, he heard the figure's surprised and delighted voice. From the looks of it, Xiaochen was not here to seek revenge. Xiaochen took a closer look and asked doubtfully, Physician Chen, what are you doing? The person in front of him was Physician Chen of Huichanhole. After not seeing him for a long time, the old man who was previously quite spirited had actually become much more haggard. It was unknown what had happened during this period of time. He invited him into the Rui workshop and poured him a cup of green tea. After taking a sip, Dr. Chen sighed and said with a bitter tone, County Lieutenant, you really made me look for you for a long time. Why is Dr. Chen looking for me? Li Yi looked at him in confusion. Did I owe him money? Looking at him, it seemed that he owed him a lot. Impossible. I don't remember when I borrowed money from him. Looking at the county lieutenant's confused face, the expression on Dr. Chen's face could no longer be described in words. Since the last time he saw the county lieutenant suture the wound with a needle and thread, Dr. Chen knew that this was another great achievement. He solemnly asked him to spread this method. At that time, the county lieutenant also readily agreed, but after that day, there was no news. Although he personally saw the county lieutenant's rescue that day, he went to see the patient. The suture was obviously not an ordinary thread, and there seemed to be some details before the suture. He still had a lot of doubts in these aspects. It was a matter of great importance, so it was impossible for him to hastily present this method. As a doctor, Dr. Chen certainly knew the importance of this method. If all the doctors in the world could learn this method, many lives would be saved. In the days when he was waiting for the county lieutenant to teach this method, he didn't know the taste of food and couldn't sleep at night. If he could also leave a small mark on this great merit, what kind of honor would it be? However, after waiting for a few days, he didn't see the county lieutenant again. Dr. Chen couldn't sit still and went to the county government office to look for him several times, but he only got the answer that the county lieutenant was not in. He went to the Rui workshop to look for him, but the door of the shop was closed, and there was a big lock hanging outside. He stayed outside for several days, but no one came. One night, he finally saw the light in the shop, but before he got close, he was put on the neck by several knives at the same time. He was almost scared to death in the middle of the night. If he didn't explain his identity to those people, his head would have been cut off. Thinking of his experience these days, and then looking at the county lieutenant's confused expression at this time, it was obvious that he had forgotten about that matter. Dr. Chen almost spat out a mouthful of old blood. Forcibly suppressing his old blood pressure, Dr. Chen stood up and respectfully bowed to Li Yi, saying, "I beg you, Your Excellency, to spread the method of suturing wounds to the world. Countless people and soldiers will remember the county lieutenant's great kindness." After Dr. Chen spoke, Li Yi remembered this matter. At that time, he seemed to have said that he would teach him the method of suturing wounds, but he didn't. At that time, he was worried about those gangsters, so he didn't remember it later. If he hadn't suddenly mentioned it today, he probably wouldn't have remembered it for the rest of his life. They didn't need to remember his great kindness. Saving a life was better than building a 7-storied pagoda. Suturing wounds didn't require any technical content, but it could play a big role on the battlefield. If the doctors in the army could learn it, at least more than 20% of the soldiers could escape from the line of death. Gunpowder was like a devil locked in Pandora's box, a machine that harvested human lives in the cold weapon era. Li Yi was the person who released it. No one knew how many people would die in the hands of this devil in the future. Although he didn't do it himself, it could be regarded as an indirect sin. He didn't want to build an innumerable pagoda to become a Buddha, but it was good to reduce some of his sins. In order to ensure that he didn't miss any key information, Dr. Chen made full use of the truth that a good memory was inferior to a bad pen. He deliberately borrowed a pen and paper from Li Yi and wrote down all the words that Li Yi said next. After that, he also asked Li Yi to check it several times until there was no mistake. Looking at the dense page of paper, Dr. Chen finally showed a smile on his face. This piece of paper was as light as a feather, but it weighed more than 10,000 pounds in his heart. If the future generations could remember his name when they mentioned the suturing technique again, besides feeling grateful to County Magistrate Li, he wouldn't have any regrets even if he died now. County Magistrate Chen Mufing, dare not forget your kindness in this life. Dr. Chen's face was solemn, and he once again bowed respectfully to Li Yi. The bow just now was for the people in the world, and this bow was for himself. In this world, everyone wanted to have a chance to leave their name in history and be remembered by the future generations. Dr. Chen was naturally no exception. County Magistrate Li, who gave him this opportunity, could accept his big bow. County Magistrate, if your relatives and friends need medicine for any diseases in the future, you can come to our Huichan Hall. We won't charge a penny for the medicine. In order to show his sincerity, Dr. Chen patted his chest and said. Li Yi looked at him. Compared with Her Royal Highness who only exploited him and never gave him any benefits, Dr. Chen's sincerity was already very good, but why did he still have an urge to kick him? Chapter 262. Dr. Chen held the piece of paper and left as if he had found a treasure. Before he left, he told Li Yi that when he got back, he had to make a copy of what was written on it and personally hand it over to Sir Lu of the Imperial Physicians' Bureau. As for the original manuscript, which was this piece of paper, he had to keep it at home and pray to it every day so that it could be passed down to future generations. It seemed that for the ancient people, money was not the most important thing. Even when they did not have enough to eat, clothes to wear, and food to eat, they still valued reputation and honor more than anything else. Scholars sharpened their brains to enter the court and become an official. Which one of them did not have ambitions to fulfill, to make a career, and to leave their name in the annals of history? Perhaps later on, they only thought about making money and wielding power, but that was a trend in a bad situation. One could not deny their original intentions. Dr. Chen put down his pride and asked him for advice on suturing wounds. He even traveled thousands of miles from Qing and Prefecture to the capital to personally hand this thing over to the hands of the imperial physician, Lu Jimin, so that all the doctors in the world could learn it. All this was just to leave a small mark in the annals of history. If someone in the future, when suturing a wound, had a 1 in a million chance of thinking of the name Chen Mufeng, he would probably laugh out loud in his coffin. His obsession was so deep that if Li Yi had said no at that time, Dr. Chen would probably have knocked his head on Li Yi's body to prove his sincerity. As he walked out of Rui's workshop, he sighed. Leaving a name in the annals of history was far more practical than a few hundred or 1,000 taels of silver. In the future, if he had a cold or diarrhea, he would not go to other medicine shops, but to Huichan Hole. Whatever he could get back was better. Li Yi held a sword in his hand and waved it in the courtyard. Every day, he would take out 2 hours to practice martial arts in the courtyard. This had become his daily routine. The sword in his hand was Lu Rui's treasure. After much coaxing and pestering, he finally managed to borrow it from her. He also used 10 pieces of osmanthus cakes as a condition for her to teach him a set of swordsmanship. The osmanthus cake was given to him by Wan Ruoqing. He liked doing business without any cost the most. In 2 days, he had almost mastered the basic sword art taught by Lu Rui. When he was fighting with Mississippi Lu, who only used a branch and did not use any true qi, his sword was knocked away after only 2 moves, and the branch was on his neck. The evaluation he received was that he only knew inflexible moves and did not know how to be flexible. Even if he learned a powerful sword art, it would be useless. Li Yi was also helpless about this. He didn't have much experience in fighting, and only Mississippi Lu was willing to spar with him. How much flexibility could he possibly have? He also knew where his shortcomings were. When it came to practicing martial arts, not everyone could dominate the world after learning a powerful martial art. Without enough accumulation of experience, it was like owning a treasure for nothing. The only thing missing was the key to open the door. It would be a waste not to use the free sparring partner. If he fought with Mississippi Lu more, he would become more and more powerful. Uncle Han walked over with a cloth bag in his hand and put it on the stone table. There was a rustling sound coming from the cloth bag. Uncle Han smiled and said, "Young master, the small wooden blocks are all done. Thank you for your hard work, Uncle Han." Li Yi opened the cloth bag and saw piles of small wooden blocks inside. They already had the shape of mahjong, and the size was similar to the size of the mahjong in the future. The edges and corners were also polished very smooth, so it would not hurt his hand. He counted the number, and there were exactly 150 pieces. There were 136 pieces in a set of mahjong. In case one piece was broken, there was a spare. Now that he had the wooden blocks, he would leave the rest to Mississippi Lu. Looking at Lu Rui, who was practicing swordsmanship not far away, Li Yi carried the cloth bag and walked over. She was practicing the Tai Chi swordsmanship. Recently, she seemed to have hit a bottleneck. She often raised her sword and slashed randomly. When there was nothing to do, Li Yi did not dare to talk to her. "Rui, how about we discuss something?" Seeing Li Yi walking over, Lu Rui put away the sword in his hand. He glanced at her and said impatiently, "What?" Her tone was a little irritated. These days, her learning of the Tai Chi swordsmanship was smooth. 2 days ago, she finally hit a bottleneck. Her progress was slow, as if she was stuck in a quagmire. "Help me carve something on these wooden blocks, and I will teach you the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship." Li Yi looked at her and said temptingly. Negotiation was also an art. First of all, one had to know what the other party needed. Then, they would be able to achieve miraculous results. Because of this matter, Mississippi Lu was like having her period for the second time in a month. Her temper was bad, and even Xiao Huan was avoiding her. She could not resist the temptation and could only be a free labor in exchange for what she needed. You know the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship? Anger flashed across Lu Rui's face. She glared at him. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because she had hit a bottleneck, she was thinking about how to break through even when she was eating and sleeping. Suddenly, someone told her that she knew the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship. Her first thought was not happiness, but anger. This was Mississippi Lu's logic. Seeing that Mississippi Lu's gaze was starting to turn hostile, Li Yi was a little puzzled. The story should not have developed like this. Shouldn't she agree to his request and carve mahjong in exchange for the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship that he talked nonsense about? Why was she looking at him like that? Wait, why did she raise her sword? What do you want? Wait, let's talk. Put down your sword first. Don't do it. Help. After a while, Li Yi was forced to a corner by Lu Rui. Mississippi Lu probably did not know that her current position was called leaning against the wall in the future. She only looked at Li Yi with a mocking gaze. Li Yi felt that he was too naive just now. Women were unreasonable creatures. If this woman was called Lu Rui, then she could not be judged by common sense. The idea of using the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship that even he did not know whether it was real or fake had been proven to be impossible. Looking at Mississippi Lu's expression, she was ready to force herself on him. There was no rice at home, so Rui took Xiao Huan out to buy some. Uncle Han closed the door when he went out. There were only the two of them at home. Even if they screamed their throats out, no one would come to save them. For Taiji, the sword moves aren't important. Only by memorizing the constantly revolving sword intent and forgetting the order of the moves can one obtain its essence. When facing an enemy, one must control the sword with his will, allowing it to be ever-changing and have endless moves. Only by mastering it thoroughly can one be able to use it as one pleases. A man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. Facing Mississippi Lu's robbing behavior, Li Yi decided to compromise for now. Although he did not really understand what this sentence meant, when Zhang Sanfeng taught Zhang Wuji swordsmanship on Wudang Mountain, he made him forget the moves. Perhaps this was what it meant. It should be able to scare Mississippi Lu, right? After interacting with Rui for so long, Li Yi already knew that the more mysterious something was, the more it could scare her. As for whether or not she could learn anything from it, it would depend on her own comprehension. Sure enough, after hearing this sentence, Mississippi Lu finally let go of him. A familiar blank expression appeared on her pretty face. Li Yi let out a sigh of relief. When it came to tricking people, ordinary people could not be compared to those Taoist priests and monks. Priest Zhang was really a god, and he could not catch up to him. Chapter 263. Just when Li Yi gave up on the idea of hiring Mississippi Lu for free and planned to do it himself, Lu Rui walked over with her sword in her arms. Tell me, what did you want from me? She looked at Li Yi with her sword in her arms. The feeling of a storm just now disappeared without a trace, and she felt a sense of lightness. Nothing much. I just want you to help me carve something on this. Li Yi pointed at the pile of small wooden blocks and said. A moment later, the long sword in Rui's hand was replaced by a sharp little dagger. Her movements were so fast that Li Yi couldn't see it clearly. Rings or long strips quickly appeared on the small blocks. After they were carved, she threw them to Li Yi. Li Yi couldn't believe it. Mississippi Lu had changed so much before and after. Did her period leave for the second time this month in such a short time? Or did she really understand the essence of Tai Chi's sword from those words and successfully break through the realm? After careful observation, he found that there seemed to be some small changes in her body. In the past, she was like a sharp sword that could scare people to death with just a glance. Now, that kind of temperament had weakened a lot, and there was an additional indescribable feeling. This feeling was more or less similar to the feeling that Rui gave him. Li sighed in his heart, feeling quite hurt. What kind of person was this? He just randomly made a few sentences, and she actually understood the essence of martial arts. Wasn't what she said just now nonsense in wuxia novels? Could it be that old Master Jean, the master of wuxia novels, was actually a peerless master who returned to the natural state? He probably wouldn't have the chance to verify the truth of this matter in this lifetime. He picked up the small wooden block that Lu Rui threw over and painted the patterns on it. The ink quickly seeped in, and he put it under the sun to dry it in a short while. Winter really wasn't a good season. It was annoying to always be under the sun. Occasionally, he could sit on the Kong and play mahjong to change his mood. There were 4 people in the house, just enough for a table. In a few days, he would also make the poker cards. When Rui and Xiao Huan cooked, the 3 of them could also play do di zhu. Thinking about it, it wasn't a bad idea. Old son, you're such a busy man. How come you have time to visit me today? In a dilapidated thatched cottage outside the prefecture city, an old man who was lying on a bed looked at the old man's surnamed son as he walked in and said with a smile. I came to see if you're dead or not, old son said without hesitation. Don't worry. I have to see if you're dead before I can close my eyes. They were old friends who often joked about such things. The old man lying on the bed with a somewhat dispirited complexion did not get angry. Instead, he retorted sarcastically. Old man's son placed a pile of things in a corner. Immediately, a young man came over with a porcelain bowl and respectfully said, Grandpa's son, drink some water. You've accepted a good disciple. Old man's son rubbed the young man's head and said with a smile. Knowing that his master and Grandpa's son had something to say, the young man put down the bowl and left. Speaking of the young man in front of him, the old man lying on the bed relaxed his eyebrows. The old man on the bed looked at old man's son and said, Let's get straight to the point. I don't have many years left to live. I heard that your farm has a steady stream of customers these days, and you've turned a dead farm into a farm. I admire your ability, and I've never asked you for anything in my life. I just hope that after I die, you can give this child something to eat. The child is still young, and he can't live alone. As long as he doesn't starve to death, you can do whatever you want with him. No, that won't do. Old son shook his head before he finished listening. A trace of anger appeared on the old man's face and he said, Old son, this child's talent is not bad. If you train him for a few years, he will be able to earn money for you. We've known each other for a lifetime, and you're not even willing to help me with this. Old son shook his head and said, Don't be in such a hurry to die. You should teach your disciple yourself. When I came here, I already sent little Yun to find a doctor. When the time comes, I'll ask the doctor to write a prescription and have your disciple boil it for you twice a day. I reckon that he will recover very quickly. When the time comes, I still need your help. This old man has so much talent, it would be a pity if he died. The old man on the bed listened with a blank face. Old son said a lot, but he became more and more confused. If you have something to say, just say it. Stop your storytelling. The old man's muddy eyes stared at old son and said. Old son patted his shoulder and said with a smile, Good thing, very good thing. The youth squatting outside the door used a wooden stick to tease the ants on the ground. There were not many ants in winter. Maybe it was because the weather was good today, but there were a few ants moving around under the eaves. The youth kept drawing circles with the wooden stick and watched the ants move back and forth in the circle. From time to time, he would look back into the house. He didn't know what Grandpa's son and master were talking about. Every once in a while, there would be a few sounds of laughter. Grandpa's son seemed to be very happy, and Grandpa was also very happy. Why didn't little Yun come with Grandpa's son today? She even said that she would go to the mountains with him to set a trap to catch rabbits in a few days. As the young man thought about this, He raised his head and saw a young man who looked about the same age as him walking over with another figure. 80,000. Li Yi sat cross-legged on the warm brick bed and took a tile from the small table. He rubbed it with his thumb for a while, but he couldn't figure out what it was. He took a peek, shook his head, and threw the tile in his hand out. Looking at the messy tiles in front of him, his expression was quite gloomy. Lady Luck obviously didn't favor him today. After teaching Rui and the others how to play mahjong, he didn't win even once after a few rounds. He lost 5 taels of silver. 70,000. Rui's expression was even more gloomy than Li Yi's. She lost 10 taels of silver. Rui smiled and played a tile. This thing called mahjong that her husband made was quite fun. She had already won 5 taels of silver. 9 circles. Xiao Huan's eyes were curved into crescent moons. Second Mrs. 10 taels of silver were all won by her. When it was Li Yi's turn to play, he clearly felt his thigh being pinched by someone. He looked down and saw that Mississippi Lu was making a gesture to him. She stretched out 2 fingers on one hand and made a circle with her index finger and thumb on the other. This was what 2 circles meant. Li Yi glanced at her. Playing mahjong was all about fairness, and she actually wanted to cheat. However, when he thought about it, if Mississippi Lu continued to lose, someone might suffer. For the sake of family harmony and world peace, he had no choice but to disassemble his tile and play at 2 circles. Eat! Rui couldn't wait to pick up Li Yi's tile. She was very satisfied with his tactfulness. With this 2 circles, she could listen to the tiles. His little trick just now might not be able to fool her sister, but it was not a problem to trick Xiao Huan. The little maid was too lucky today. He had to suppress her arrogance first. Get rich. He casually played a tile. Whoosh! Xiao Huan stretched out her white and tender little hand and pushed down her tile wall. Her dimples were revealed as she smiled. 13 circles. Young master, miss, I won again. Chapter 264. Recently, Li Yi and Lu Rui had become closer because they had never won a game of mahjong with only the 2 of them in the house. Mahjong was originally created to relieve their boredom, but the more they played, the more depressed they became. It was not a big deal to lose money, but they had to regain their dignity. Mississippi Lu was more competitive than him, and she would not allow herself to lose to others in any aspect. So recently, the game at home had not stopped. Then, the 2 of them lost more and more. Li Yi finally understood what was going on in a gambler's mind. It was no wonder that so many people had lost everything because of gambling since ancient times. This was a road of no return. He thought he had the home advantage. Rui and the others had just started playing mahjong, and it would take them a long time to familiarize themselves with the game. However, the goddess of fortune only cared about Xiao Huan and Rui. He and Mississippi Lu had never received the goddess's blessing. It was indeed a must-kill weapon for middle-aged and elderly women. Within 2 days, a second set of mahjong appeared in the house. After dinner, the women who were idle at home played mahjong for the whole afternoon. Old Fong and the others were busy renovating the stoves for each family. After Mrs. Fong came to the kitchen to take a look, she no longer mentioned the matter of Old Fong smashing the stoves. She played mahjong with a few other women and estimated that they would be able to have dinner the next day. After cooking, the Kong was warm and comfortable. This glutton finally did something reliable. When Li Yi came back from outside, he saw a few women in front of the house from afar. The sounds of eating and banging were incessant. 2 elderly women shook their heads and sighed at the degeneration of morals in the world. How did the originally diligent wives suddenly become lazy women? The children waved their arms and cried out that they were hungry, but the mothers only cared about grabbing the wooden blocks. When the children cried out that they were hungry, the mothers threw a few copper coins to the children to buy food. In the past, such women would have been driven back to their parents' homes. Living in this world was not just for food and clothing, but also for entertainment. The emergence of mahjong had undoubtedly opened the door to a new world for the women in the stronghold. They had found spiritual sustenance. As for whether or not they would become addicted to it, they did not have to worry too much. It was just for the novelty of playing mahjong for a few days. After the novelty wore off, mahjong could only be reduced to an ornament in daily life. People who were used to living a hard life would not be idle all the time. For example, Old Man's son had become busier and busier recently. Li Yi had just returned from the brothel. While Old Man's son was not around, he and Ruoqing spent a long time talking about recruiting performers and expanding their business. A medium-sized brothel had been rebuilt outside the city. According to Li Yi, it was more appropriate to call it a theater. Building such a thing was different from building a house. It was the same as building a shack. The place that had been built in a few days was sturdy, far better than other crudely built brothels. It would definitely not collapse under the weight of heavy snow again. As for actors, since this model was still in the experimental stage, they had only recruited 20 of them for the time being. Li Yi and Wan Ruoqing had discussed it and decided that a medium-sized theater should have 20 actors. It would not only satisfy the performance requirements, but it would also be easier to manage. Living at the bottom of society, it was common for them to not have enough to eat. No one could refuse a fixed monthly salary of 500 copper coins. At first, those performers thought that Old Man's son was lying to them. After a short moment of shock, they seemed to be afraid that Old Man's son would change his mind, so they immediately pressed their fingerprints on the contract. In addition to the salary, the content of the contract also required them not to spread what they learned here. Everyone understood this. For people like them, this was something to eat. If others learned it, they would be the ones starving to death. No one dared to violate the contract. Even if this was brought to the government, it would count. It was definitely a place that they could not afford to offend. Stage plays were still very unfamiliar to those newly recruited performers. After listening to Li Yi's suggestion, Old Man's son and the others pondered for a long time before they came up with it. These people had no experience, so they still needed to go through some training before they could officially take up the job. Although the painted skin was still popular, it was obviously not as popular as before. The next one to be put on the big stage would be a Chinese ghost story. Unlike the former, which relied on horror to attract people, stories like romance and the female ghost scholar would probably be more attractive to men in this era. This was especially true for scholars. Every single one of them had fantasized about various romantic affairs, such as spending the spring night with a fox immortal or a beautiful female ghost. 80% of the supernatural novels on the market had such a plot, and it was still the mainstream of the market. It was a group of ancient losers who liked to fantasize. If their fantasies were fulfilled, they would not be afraid of not, generously, "Oh right, I still have to find time to copy a few more stories. Why don't I take out the complete Liao Zhai novel and make it into a series?" Li Yi lay comfortably in the huge bathtub. Actually, the ancient people also knew how to enjoy themselves. If the bathtub was covered with a lid, could it be called a sauna? In the middle of winter, there was nothing more comfortable than soaking in a warm room with a hot bath. If there was, then there would be a pair of soft hands constantly massaging your shoulders while you were soaking in the bath. The tiredness of the day would be dispelled. Xiao Huan's massage skills were becoming more and more skillful. Li Yi secretly condemned this kind of luxurious and decadent life in his heart. He was incomparably disgusted with feudal hedonism. He opened his eyes and glanced at the door through the mist. Xiao Huan had gone out to get hot water. Why wasn't she back yet? Creak, the door was pushed open, and he could vaguely see a figure carrying a bucket of water in. Li Yi closed his eyes in satisfaction. Footsteps came from behind him. Warm water was poured into the bathtub. Just as the servant girl was about to leave, Li Yi called out to her without opening his eyes. "Wait a moment, help massage the young master's shoulders again." The footsteps paused, and a moment later, a pair of soft hands were placed on his shoulders. He felt that Xiao Huan's skills this time had improved quite a bit. He remembered that when he was shopping previously, the servant girl stared at a bracelet in golden jade lane for a long time. He would buy it for her tomorrow. As he massaged, Li Yi began to feel strange. No matter how fast the servant girl's skills in massaging the shoulders improved, it was impossible for her to reach Rui's level in less than a quarter of an hour. Moreover, the familiar chatter by his ear was gone, and there was no longer any pleading for him to continue telling her the story that she had not finished. Just when he was about to turn his head to take a look, a familiar voice sounded. "Husband, the water seems to be a little cold. Do you want to add some hot water?" This was Rui's voice. Chapter 265. Ordering Rui around was not as easy as ordering Xiao Huan around. He did not add more hot water, nor did he let Rui continue to massage his shoulders. After she went out, he came out of the bathtub, dried his body, lay on the bed with his arms as a pillow, and stared at the ceiling in a daze. Before going to bed, he would habitually think about some things. Even the memory fragments hidden in the depths of his mind in his previous life were found in a corner, carefully savoring, and never tired of it. One by one, the happy, sad, or angry things were like fleeting clouds. Although it had only been a few months, it seemed to have crossed thousands of years. Those things, whether happy or sad, did not cause much ripples in his heart. He just tried his best not to think of those familiar faces. Every time this happened, an emotion called yearning would spread like crazy. Those people or things, he was destined to be unable to give up in this life. If there was a chance to go back, no matter how difficult it was, he would not have any hesitation, even if it was just a glance, and then look at that familiar world. Pa. A crisp sound rang in the room, but Li Yi, who was in a state of absent-mindedness, did not notice it. Today was the 15th, and the moon outside was very round. This day of every month was the most difficult time for Li Yi, especially when he was alone. There was no sound around, and a feeling of loneliness escaped from the depths of his soul. However, even in a state of absent-mindedness, the feeling of dizziness could still be felt, and the strength in his body was gradually draining away. The feeling of nausea also gradually became clearer. Naturally, it was impossible for him to feel dizzy and nauseous because of homesickness. When he realized that the situation was not quite right, he immediately recovered his mind and sat up from the bed. At this time, the room was filled with a strange smell. Li Yi was very familiar with this smell, the smell of coal smoke that he often smelled when he was a child. Not knowing when, the chimney made of bamboo on the honeycomb briquette stove actually cracked. The symptoms that he felt just now were obviously mild carbon monoxide poisoning. The chimney made of bamboo couldn't completely expel the smoke, so people who had a stove would usually choose to extinguish the stove at night. After taking a bath just now, he forgot to do so. Fortunately, he didn't fall asleep. Otherwise, Rui and the others would have to wait to collect his corpse tomorrow morning. With a lingering fear in his heart, he moved the stove outside and opened the door and windows to the fullest. He sat alone on the porch and looked at the moon. She did not know when the carbon monoxide in the room would run out. The moon tonight was big and round. It was said that the moon on the 15th of the lunar month was round on the 16th of the lunar month, but the round in the word circumference was not the round in the word reunion. Wearing an unlined garment, it was quite cold sitting on the porch. However, Li Yi did not want to move now, so he did not go back to the room to get his clothes. He just leaned against a pillar and looked up at the sky. He did not know whether the moon in the two worlds was the same. At least on the surface, there was no difference. There was a large dark spot alternating between light and dark. Now, the common saying was that the moonlight was blocked by the osmanthus tree in the moon palace, and almost everyone thought so. Every time this happened, he would involuntarily have a feeling of loneliness as a master. A group of ignorant people. It was just a plane on the moon. There was no osmanthus tree. Last time, when Li Xian was drunk, he said he wanted to go to the moon to see Chang Yi. With the current conditions, he could not think about going to the moon, which was even more difficult than reaching the sky. A figure had been leaning against the door for a long time, watching Li Yi's expression alternating between joy and sadness. His eyes had never left the moon in the sky, and he was holding a garment in his hand, but he never walked over. Achoo! He sneezed and almost snot came out of his nose. When he was about to get up and go to the room to get his clothes, he felt a weight on his shoulder, and a coat immediately appeared on his body. "Husband, are you admiring the moon alone?" Lu Rui sat down beside Li Yi, also staring at the moon in the sky. "I'm thinking, when can I go to the moon to have a look?" Li Yi seemed to murmur unconsciously. "Ah." There was a little surprise in Rui's voice. She looked back at him, blinking her eyes. She had always been steady, but at this moment, she actually looked like a little girl. She reached out and touched Li Yi's forehead. After finding that he did not have a fever, she became even more confused. The Moon Palace was the place where immortals lived. How could mortals go up there? Since ancient times, countless people had thought about it, but no one had done it. Although the moon always hung there quietly, there was no door. Only immortals could go up there. Don't be surprised. In theory, this is very feasible. Li Yi took her hand away from his forehead and found that it was very cold. He held it with both hands and said, "Maybe thousands of years later, someone will really do it. However, if an ordinary person goes up there, they will definitely die. It's hot in the day and cold at night. There are holes made by big stones everywhere. It's not a place for people to stay at all. If they don't die from the cold or the heat, it will be fun. If they don't die from the cold or heat, then it'll be fun. Everyone there is an expert in Qigong. With a leap, they can cover at least a distance of several feet. Their strength is also extremely great. An ordinary person can lift the stone lion at the entrance with just a little effort." Lu Rui let Li Yi hold her hand and transfer his warmth to her. She listened to him talk about these incredible things and would occasionally ask a few questions. He was always so knowledgeable. He knew a lot of things that she had never heard before. In the past, she thought that people who were educated were all so amazing. Later, she gradually realized that her husband was different from those scholars. No scholar could tell so many wonderful stories, and no scholar knew so many ways to earn money. Furthermore, no scholar knew that Chang Yi was not on the moon. Her husband even knew how far the moon was from here. If there was a road that could go straight to the moon, an ordinary person would have to walk for 10 years to get there. If it was someone else, they would definitely think that the person who said these things was crazy. However, she knew that her husband never lied about these things. Achoo! He couldn't continue gossiping about the moon with Rui. Li Yi had already sneezed a few times. It was winter, and it was still cold to sit outside with clothes on. His butt was almost frozen to the point of losing consciousness when he sat on the cold ground. Seeing Li Yi stand up, Lu Rui walked into his room and quickly came out. She shook her head and said, "I can't go in yet. The carbon poison has not dissipated completely." When she went to Li Yi's room to get his clothes, she already felt that something was wrong. Seeing him put the stove outside, how could she not know what had happened? Forget it. I'll sleep in the kitchen tonight. It was really too cold. Li Yi really missed the hot Kong bed. Lu Rui shook her head and said, "Xiao Huan is afraid of the cold. I've already let her sleep in the kitchen. I'm afraid she's already asleep." Li Yi wrapped his clothes around his body. Originally, he had one room, Rui had another, and Xiaohuan usually slept with Rui. Now that he couldn't sleep in his room at night, and Xiaohuan had taken over the warm Kong bed in the kitchen, did he have to sleep outside tonight? Why don't you sleep in this concubine's room tonight? Hearing Rui's voice, Li Yi's expression froze. Chapter 266. Why don't you sleep in this concubine's room tonight? Hearing Rui's words, Li Yi's first thought was that it was her trick again. Last time, she closed the door and asked him to take off his clothes, but he didn't expect it to be for healing. This time, it must not be what he thought at first. Although he had the soul of thousands of years later and was much more open-minded than the ancient people, in fact, he was still very thin-skinned on some things. After all, he was just a young man without any experience in love in his previous life. It was too difficult to expect him to be an expert in flirting with girls, especially beautiful girls in ancient times. He walked into Rui's room generously. He would sleep here for the night. Rui, Xiaohuan, or Rui could make do for one night. In the future, he would have to put out the stove early at night, and Fong would have to warn him. Carbon monoxide poisoning was almost incurable in ancient times. Even if he could be cured after a long time, there would be serious sequelae. He would either be paralyzed or stupid, and he needed to be vigilant at all times. There was a faint fragrance on the sheets and quilt, which Li Yi would never forget in his life. When he first came to Willow Leaf Village, he woke up in this fragrance. It was not perfume, but the natural body fragrance of a woman. Rui carried a quilt from the next room and closed the door. Under Li Yi's puzzled gaze, she walked to the bed and said, "Husband, can you move a little deeper?" Carbon monoxide poisoning and Fong were all forgotten by Li Yi at the moment. If she liked to inhale, she could inhale. She had a good body, so inhaling some carbon monoxide was nothing. Hugging the quilt with a faint fragrance, he shrank to the foot of the bed. Watching Rui crawling into the quilt and lying next to him, Li Yi was still in a daze. It turned out that he was right this time. Xiaohuan and Rui are asleep, and I don't want to disturb them. She turned to look at Li Yi and explained, "It's getting late. Husband, you should rest early." If Li Yi had not fallen into a state of shock, he would have been able to hear the slight tremble in her voice. Unfortunately, he was still unable to get over the soft flesh on his arm. He pinched it hard and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The pain meant that he wasn't dreaming, nor was it a hallucination caused by inhaling too much carbon monoxide. In the middle of the room, the flame of the oil lamp on the table was still flickering. Rui flicked her finger, and a strong wind swept across, plunging the room into darkness. Although he was only covered with a blanket, Li Yi did not feel cold at all. Instead, his body felt warm from the inside out, his nose was filled with a familiar fragrance. He had always been used to sleeping alone. Now that there was another person by his side, the sleepiness that had just arisen was instantly gone. However, none of this was important. His heartbeat quickened, and his mind was filled with all kinds of guesses. What did she mean? Was it what he thought? If he pounced on her now, would he be beaten to death by her? The good tacit understanding between the two was finally broken tonight. Li Yi, who was almost an idiot when it came to relationships, couldn't guess what she was thinking. There was a fierce battle in his heart. Should he be a beast, or worse than a beast? This was a question worth thinking about. Li Yi felt that he was starting to be like a philosopher again. In the darkness, where Li Yi couldn't see, Lu Rui's pretty face blushed from her neck to her ears. She could hear that Li Yi's heartbeat was much faster than before. In fact, as a martial arts master, she couldn't control her heartbeat at this moment. It wasn't easy to make this decision. She pondered for a long time before she plucked up the courage to say it. Husband and wife, they had to sleep together eventually. Although they weren't used to it now, there would be a day when they would get used to it. Aunt Fong had already asked several times why there was no movement in her stomach after being married for almost half a year. She asked if she should find a doctor to take a look. She was already so old that her child could run around. Listening to Aunt Fong's private words with a red face, she still blushed when she thought about it. When she thought about those things she would do with her husband in the future, she could no longer maintain her calm state of mind. Although she was very skilled in martial arts, she was still a woman from an ordinary family. She had practiced martial arts hard since she was young. It was only because after she became stronger that no one could bully the two of them. Now, she didn't have to worry about being bullied. She had also reached a level that others couldn't reach in their lifetime in martial arts. Instead, she liked such a peaceful life. In her heart, she also hoped to be able to live like a normal husband and wife as soon as possible. The prerequisite was to break the silent tacit understanding between the two of them. No matter what, someone had to take the first step. If that person wasn't her husband, then it could only be herself. She stretched her hands out of the quilt and folded them in front of her chest. Her eyes were wide open. She felt an extra breath beside her. It was already very late at night, but she still didn't feel sleepy at all. When a hand reached out from the side, her heart couldn't help but start to beat wildly. She almost ran away, but in the end, that hand only held her hand and didn't move further. Even Li Yi could feel that Rui's breathing had become hurried, which meant that her heart was not calm at this time. After feeling her mood, his heart calmed down. Sleep. Their fingers were tightly interlocked. Li Yi closed his eyes and quickly entered a dream. The breathing beside him quickly calmed down, and Lu Rui let out a long sigh of relief. She tilted her head slightly to take a look, and an imperceptible smile appeared on her pretty face. She slowly closed her eyes. Li Yi had another dream at night. This time, there were no messy things in the dream. Naturally, he didn't have to wash his underwear secretly in the morning. In the dream, he was in his home in the 21st century, sitting on the sofa and watching TV. Rui, who was wearing a white dress, was busy in the kitchen. The doorbell rang. Li Yi got up and opened the door. When he opened the door, a long sword was on his neck. Opposite him was Mississippi Lu, who was dressed up and glaring at him. At the end of the dream, he was still being chased by Mississippi Lu with a sword. Li Yi didn't understand why Rui always liked to run into his dream. This time, the reason for the chase was that he kidnapped her sister. Early in the morning, he got up from the bed. Although there was no one beside him, the fragrance was still there, which meant that everything last night was not a dream. Last night, he had crossed a huge chasm. There was a relaxed smile on the corner of his mouth. The carbon poison was really too annoying. Li Yi felt that his previous room couldn't be used anymore. Coincidentally, there was not enough space in the storage room at home. From now on, he would use it as a storage room. As for the original storage room, it was not bad to modify it into a study. Xiao Huan walked out of Li Yi's room with a copper basin in her hand. She looked puzzled. When she was about to ask Miss where the son-in-law went early in the morning, she walked to the door of Miss's room and looked inside. The copper basin in her hand fell to the ground with a clang. Chapter 267. I'm sorry, I won. Rui played a tile. Li Yi smiled and pushed down his tile wall. Rui jumped off the heated bed in annoyance. She glared at the two and said, "You two are in cahoots. I'm not playing anymore." Ever since Rui became Li Yi's mistress, Li Yi's luck came back. He kept gesturing secretly and Rui always understood his meaning. Thus, Mississippi Lu became the only one who lost money in the family. Although winning money was not the main point in the end. At most, she used a few copper coins to deal with it. However, there were wins and losses in playing mahjong. It was not a good thing to always lose. Mississippi Lu was obviously angry. She was probably going to take her sword to the courtyard to chop the air. If there was a god of mahjong, Xiao Huan must be her biological daughter. It was just that recently, she was obviously absent-minded. She was not focused when playing mahjong. No one knew what she was thinking. The next day, Li Yi changed his room into a storage room. The reason was that the room that had been ravaged by carbon poison could not be lived in. He began to live together with Xiao Huan with a peace of mind. Although he had to choose between being a beast and being worse than a beast, he had no choice but to choose the latter. But compared to the past, this was already a groundbreaking event. The reason why Xiao Huan was a little unhappy might be that she could no longer hug Rui to sleep. She had to sleep on the heated bed in the kitchen for a long time. But it did not matter. When spring came, he would build her another room. It was not a good idea for a girl to always sleep in the kitchen. Of course, the position that should have belonged to her was occupied by him. The little servant girl felt wronged first. He would slowly make it up to her later. He took Xiao Huan to buy the hairpin that she had liked for a long time. She would no longer have a depressed expression on her face. The two people walking in front were chatting. They were talking about the new play in the Chongping Street Theater. It was called A Chinese Ghost Story. The former brothel was no longer called a brothel. It was called a theater. Although most people were not used to it, the name was not the point. The point was that the plays performed in it were more novel and special. It was not comparable to any straw shed in the courtyard. He hoped that this, A Chinese Ghost Story, would be better than the previous, Painted Skin. Of course, special places always had special rules. It was said that the theater was different from ordinary brothels. Not everyone could enter just because they wanted to. They had to buy a so-called ticket at the door. Although it was called a ticket, it was actually a small wooden plaque. On it was written the plays that could be watched with the wooden plaque, as well as the amount of time that could be spent inside. When they left, they had to return the wooden plaque. The tickets weren't expensive, only a few copper coins were enough. It wasn't even as much as the tips they threw out at once. Someone cursed inwardly. Those actors were crazy for money. Had they never seen a brothel that took the initiative to accept money? You want money, right? I won't look anymore, okay? Many people were very satisfied with this. They felt that the idea of the theater was really wonderful. The appearance of the tickets was to keep those who had no money outside. The last time they went to watch a play, there were actually beggars sitting next to them. They were dirty and smelly. There was only so much space in the theater. If they were late, there wouldn't even be a place to stand. Now, it was better. Those who only wanted to join in the fun and were unwilling to pay for tips could not enter. They were happy to be at peace. They sat leisurely with a pot of tea and a stack of broad beans. After watching the plays they liked, they would leave. It was extremely comfortable. Of course, when a new play was released, they had to be more agile. Who would care about a few copper coins for the people who lived in the prefectural city? If they were late, they could only stand. Thank you, son-in-law. With a newly bought hairpin in her hair, Xiao Huan's eyes turned into crescent moons again. In one hand, she held a tonghulu. It was a gift from Aunt Sue when she met her on the street. In the other hand, she held on to Li Yi's arm. She took a bite and leaned over to give a bite to Li Yi. She took a bite. The tonghulu in the winter didn't melt so easily. The taste was improved. Those women had been trying to make more delicious tonghulu. Now, they had developed several different styles. After eating the tonghulu, the young maidservant looked up at Li Yi and said expectantly, "Son-in-law, let's go to the theater to watch a play, okay?" Just now, she heard the two people in front of her talk about a Chinese ghost of Chennu. The son-in-law had told her this story. After hearing so many ghost stories, she was no longer afraid. The last time the son-in-law brought her to see the painted skin stage play, she only screamed when the ferocious-looking female ghost came out. The son-in-law said that a Chinese ghost of Qinu was not that scary, so the young maidservant felt that it was okay for her to go and take a look. He did not reject Xiao Huan's request. Today, he had brought her out for a stroll. She grew up in the village and did not come into contact with many people. The young maidservant maintained her innocent and lively temperament very well. With her chattering by her side, any worries would be swept away. A small room was built at the entrance of the brothel. It was only big enough for one person. A dozen people lined up and passed by the small room. After placing a few copper coins inside, a wooden plate would be handed out from the inside. As one of the major shareholders of the theater, of course, Li Yi did not need to buy a ticket. He held Xiao Huan's hand and walked directly through the entrance. The people in the line originally wanted to question him, but when they saw the young man at the entrance politely salute the young man, they swallowed their words and obediently lined up to buy the ticket. After walking through the entrance, they faced the stage directly. The expanded stage was more than twice the size of the previous one. The seats below were also increased. There were separate stalls on both sides. Spending a few copper coins, one could buy a plate of broad beans and a pot of tea. There were 3 flavors of broad beans, and one could choose freely. Of course, other than broad beans, there were also many pastries. When watching a play, eating some snacks and drinking a cup of tea would immediately improve one's taste by a lot compared to those who only knew how to shout. The price of the seats in the theater was not the same. The closer one was to the stage, the clearer one could see, and the higher the price. Therefore, most of the time, there would be empty seats in the first row. Some people would feel that there was not much difference between the front and back. It was really not worth it to spend a few copper coins for a seat in the front. The curtain on the stage had not been opened yet. One could see many figures behind the curtain. They were probably still making preparations. People were still lining up to enter the theater. There were not many people in the seats. He pulled Xiao Huan to sit in the middle of the first row and waited patiently. He glanced at the wooden plate in the hands of the person beside him. On it were the words, "Painted Skin," indicating that the next performance was still, Painted Skin. Senior Pu Songling was indeed a master of his generation. There was a performance of Painted Skin here, indicating that this play was quite popular. He turned his head and looked around. He realized that from the previous brothel to the current theater, too much had changed in just a few days. Chapter 268. The theater worker banged a gong, indicating that the performance was about to begin. At this time, the theater was almost full. In the past, there had only been a few square tables in the brothel for people to sit around casually. Now, it had been changed to chairs connected together. A small platform protruded from one side of the chairs for tea and food. Of course, only the first 2 rows had this kind of treatment. They had to let those people know where the extra copper coins they spent went. Xiao Huan wanted to see a Chinese ghost story, but she didn't make it. She could only watch The Painted Skin again. Since she had nothing to do, she might as well wait with her. When the curtains were pulled back, a few more figures sat next to Xiao Huan. Li Yi only glanced at them casually. He had just turned his head when he turned back. His expression was slightly dazed. Sitting next to Xiao Huan was a man about 40 years old. His appearance was not unfamiliar to Li Yi. Professor Feng, as Magistrate Dong's god-level lackey, usually, wherever he was, Magistrate Dong would appear unless something unexpected happened. Li Yi looked over and saw the magistrate sitting next to him. He felt strange. Did the magistrate and the prefectural school professor have nothing to do all day? This was not a place high officials and nobles would come. One of them was in charge of the affairs of the prefecture, and the other was in charge of education. Logically speaking, they should be very busy. Why did they have the time to come here to watch a show? Clearly, Professor Feng also saw Li Yi. After a pause, he turned his head and whispered a few words in Magistrate Dong's ear. Magistrate Dong had a deep impression of Li Yi. His few poems had surpassed all the students in Qing and Fu. He had a close relationship with Crown Prince Ning and Princess Yongle. However, his personality was a bit strange. He was extremely talented but didn't want to be an official. It was said that he had been made a county officer by the emperor, but he almost never went to the county yamen. The strange thing was, the security of the prefectural city was better than before. In all honesty, Magistrate Dong admired Li Yi very much. Especially that poem, wanting to speak but not wanting to speak, yet saying that the sky is cold and autumn, won him a deep liking. But he clearly had deep connections with the royal family. Although he wanted to promote him, it was not appropriate for him to do so. She had already forgotten about him, but she didn't expect to bump into him here today. Magistrate Dong shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. Today, he just wanted to see the famous painted skin. He turned his head and said to another man in embroidered robes, "I'm curious what's so special about this painted skin that Brother Yen praised it so much." The man in embroidered clothes smiled and said, "I didn't expect that there would be no lack of capable people in this small brothel. Hidden in these short and strange stories is a profound truth. Under Brother Dong's rule, there are indeed many capable people. Before I left, His Majesty had already decided to implement the disciple rules in our Jing Kingdom as a book for children to learn. Brother Dong's contribution to the education of our Jing Kingdom cannot go unnoticed." Accepting the compliment of the man in embroidered clothes calmly, Magistrate Dong couldn't help but turn his head and look at the young man 2 seats away from him. Li Yi didn't want to flirt with a man, not to mention the other was the magistrate, even if it was the emperor. He didn't even think about immediately going up to greet the magistrate. These important people like to go out incognito. If he put on an appearance of greeting a superior, the magistrate might even blame him for ruining his low profile. Wan Ruoqing ran the brothel very well. There was no other brothel in the city that was cleaner, tidier, and more orderly than this one. Every performance would be slightly improved. The performers relied on their acting skills, not their bodies. They were completely incomparable to those coquettish prostitutes outside. If this place couldn't keep customers, where else could? Inspired by himself, Oldman's son was ready to open a special martial arts show, but he was still in the stage of collecting information. After the incident with the Bixia swordplay, Oldman's son keenly discovered the business opportunity. In the brothel outside the city, such stories seemed to be more popular. Moreover, the martial arts people were generous and would never be short of money. Sometimes, they would even throw large silver ingots on the stage. Oldman's son had to seize this opportunity. Li gave him a good suggestion. He could collect some strange stories in the martial arts world and ask around. Using the information he collected, he could rank the martial arts masters and revise the rankings according to the latest information. He heard that there was a man named Officer Zhao in Chuzhou City. Although he had always been known for his loyalty, he was actually a rare martial arts master. It was said that he was about to step into the Grandmaster realm. Ordinary people didn't even know this secret. Li Yi didn't pay attention to the performance on the stage. He was lost in his thoughts. If such a theater could be opened all over the Jing Kingdom, it would be a powerful force. Moreover, such a force would not easily attract the attention of others. If he could live such a peaceful life, he would consider it as contributing to the entertainment industry of this world. If there were always people who wanted to step on him, he was afraid that their feet would be pierced by nails. Stupid people, they think of ghosts as beauties. They don't listen to the words of loyalty. They are greedy for beauty. They don't know that a wife who has gone through hardships will gladly swallow the saliva of others. I don't know how many stupid people in the world don't know how to wake up. How sad. When thinking, the most annoying thing was to be interrupted, especially when the man in the brocade robe suddenly stood up and said these words with a laugh. To be able to see such emotions from watching a play, this fellow must have been educated before, and he must have been tormented by the path of sages. Even Li was not satisfied, let alone the other people in the theater. Just when they were enjoying the show, someone suddenly stood up and shouted. Especially when the guy was sitting in the front row, everyone's view was blocked. "What are you shouting for? Hurry up and sit down." They were all commoners. How could they know that the person sitting next to the man was the prefectural magistrate? They only knew that this guy had disturbed their interest in watching the show. Perhaps some people were frightened by his sudden shout, so they all spoke up in dissatisfaction. Magistrate Dong smiled bitterly. After so many years, his good friend still hadn't changed his bad habit. Thump. Among the noise, there was a dull sound that was especially clear. A young man who looked like a scholar, who was sitting behind the man in the brocade robe, knelt in front of the man in the brocade robe. After bowing respectfully, he stood up and said, "Thank you for your teachings, sir. My poor wife who has gone through hardships with me for more than 10 years has suffered. Now, for the sake of a fox outside, I actually want to divorce her. How am I different from Wang Xing?" Sir's words just now were like thunder in my ears. They were deafening. I will remember them for the rest of my life and never dare to forget them. After the scholarly young man finished speaking, he once again bowed to the man in the brocade robe and strode away without looking back. Li stared blankly at the young man's back as he walked away. He was very confused. Where did they find this actor? It's not too late to mend one's ways. The man in the brocade robe also watched the young man leave with a smile on his face. He stroked his beard, displaying the demeanor of an expert. "I'm talking to you, sit down." If it wasn't for a shoe flying from behind and accurately hitting his face, he might have been able to maintain the demeanor of an expert for a while longer. Chapter 269. Magistrate Dong was shocked to see a large shoe print appear on the face of his good friend from the capital. Official Yen. Professor Feng's little heart couldn't help but beat wildly. How dare they throw a shoe at an official from the capital? These unruly people were simply too lawless. How dare you? Who threw the shoe? A few people around the man in embroidered robes had already stood up and turned to glare at the crowd. What did he say? Is he in the right to disturb the show? Chase them out. The guards of the man in embroidered robes were angry, but the audience was even angrier. It was already kind of them not to be thrown out for making a racket in the theater, but they dared to yell at everyone. They couldn't even watch the show. Weren't the few copper coins spent in vain? In the next moment, the guards were drowned in shoes flying from behind. People had thrown out quite a few people like this who didn't know what was good for them. Every show, there would be one or two unlucky ones. This had even become a tradition in the theater. The smelly shoes flew through the air. Magistrate Dong and the other two were also affected. Of course, they couldn't stay here any longer. They ran outside pathetically and finally let out a sigh of relief. A group of unruly people, this is too much. Professor Feng's face was hit by the sole of a shoe. His face was red and he stomped his feet outside. The man in embroidered robes used his sleeve to wipe his face. He wasn't angry. He shook his head and said, "This is a quiet place to watch the show. It is our fault for making a racket and disturbing others. It is not wrong of us to be thrown out." He turned his head to look at Magistrate Dong and said with a smile, "Under Brother Dong's rule, the people are very tough." Compared to the sorry state of Professor Feng and the man in embroidered robes, Professor Dong looked much better. The shoe had not been thrown on him and his clothes were very clean. He patted his robes and said, "The one who made a racket was you. Of course it is not wrong of you to be thrown out." We are the ones who have suffered an undeserved disaster. No matter, no matter. The man in embroidered robes waved his hand and said, "My words just now have caused Brother Dong's students to repent. Brother Dong, shouldn't you treat me to a banquet to express your gratitude?" "Oh right, Professor Feng, where is the best restaurant in Qingyan Prefecture? With my meager salary, I can't afford to go to the Drunken Fragrance restaurant." Magistrate Dong smiled and said, "There is a cup of green tea. It is a bit shabby, but it is enough to serve guests. I haven't seen you for a few years, but your stinginess hasn't changed at all, Dong Wenyun." The man in embroidered robes shook his head and sighed. When Li Yi walked out, Magistrate Dong and the others were still standing outside. Xiao Huan wanted to watch the next scene of a Chinese ghost story. She asked a performer to take care of her and walked out alone. Prefectural Magistrate Dong was a boss-level official in Qing'anfu. Since he had met him, as the county magistrate, he naturally had to come up and greet him. The current Li Yi no longer considered the position of county lieutenant to be a troublesome matter. A minor rank 8 official position could eliminate most of the troubles in life. The naive thoughts of the past were long gone. This lowly official greets Prefectural Magistrate. He slowly walked in front of Prefectural Magistrate Dong and cupped his hands in salute. Li Yi had a good impression of Prefectural Magistrate Dong. This prefectural magistrate had a good reputation. Last time in the Wangfu, he had even helped him out of trouble. Prefectural Magistrate Dong looked at him and asked, "County Magistrate Li is not on duty in the Yamen. Why are you here?" Li Yi coughed lightly and said, "A few days ago, I was injured by a scoundrel. After applying for leave, I have been recuperating at home." Prefectural Magistrate Dong was just asking casually. Although he wasn't in the Yamen, the security in the prefectural city was better than before. As the prefectural magistrate, he had specially studied the interrogation methods of the Anshi Yamen's bailiffs and bailiffs, as well as the division of districts. He planned to have the other counties follow suit in a few days. Professor Feng examined Li Yi from the side. He was surprised. After not seeing him for so many days, this rude young man seemed to have changed into a different person. He had become so humble. He wasn't used to it. The new year is approaching. We need more people to maintain the security in the city. As the county magistrate, I am responsible. If you are feeling well, you should return to the Yamen as soon as possible. Prefectural Magistrate Dong nodded and suddenly said, "If I remember correctly, the Rui workshop is not far from here. I am also tired from walking. Why don't we go to your place to rest for a while and have a cup of tea? What do you think, County Magistrate Li?" Li Yi was stunned. Didn't he just rest for a long time in the theater? Sure enough, the higher the official, the more pretentious. It was not a wise thing to refuse the prefectural magistrate. Li Yi nodded and said, "Milord, please." The Rui workshop was next to the brothel. Although the family no longer lived there, Xiao Huan would still go there to clean it every few days. The room was clean and tidy. It was just enough to rest, but there was no tea. After inviting them to sit down, Li Yi went to the theater to get 2 pots of tea. Prefectural Magistrate Dong had already sat down. When he turned around, he found that the man in the brocade robe didn't follow him in. He stood at the door, raised his head, and muttered something. The strokes are elegant and graceful, the strokes are tactful and subtle, like moving clouds and flowing water. Good calligraphy, good calligraphy. Just as Dong Wenyun walked out, he heard the man in the brocade robe looking at the plaque above the shop and couldn't help praising it. He thought to himself that he had actually forgotten that the other party was obsessed with calligraphy and had collected many precious paintings at home. Furthermore, he himself was quite accomplished in calligraphy and painting, so it was normal for him to be attracted to the words on the plaque. Seeing him walk out, the man in the brocade robe looked at Prefectural Magistrate Dong and said, "Wenyun, do you know which master wrote these 3 words?" I want to pay a visit. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you to arrange it. There is no need to arrange it. The master is right there. If you have any questions, go ask him yourself. Prefectural Magistrate Dong pointed in a direction with a strange expression and said. The man in the brocade robe turned around and saw the young man just now walking over with 2 pots of tea. The man in the brocade robe looked back at Prefectural Magistrate Dong with an expression of disbelief. He, if these 3 words were written by that young man, I will eat this plaque. The man in the brocade robe didn't believe a single word of what Dong Wenyun said just now. These 3 words were written with strong and experienced strokes. It was impossible to write without decades of practice. Moreover, this was done by someone who was extremely accomplished in calligraphy. If it was an ordinary person, they might not be able to do it even after hundreds of years. This young man was at most in his early 20s. How could he have such a level of skill? It was precisely because he was proficient in calligraphy that the man in the brocade robe was so confident. If he didn't know that the young man was called the #1 talent of the Jing Kingdom by the Governor of Education, who was excellent in both poetry and calligraphy, and was able to write a legendary work like Rules for Disciples, Prefectural Magistrate Dong naturally wouldn't believe it either. If County Magistrate Li came back a little later, your plaque would be gone. Li Yi, who walked over, looked at Prefectural Magistrate Dong with a confused expression. He didn't know what to say. Chapter 270. In the Rui Square, Magistrate Dong sat on a chair and leisurely sipped tea. The man in embroidered robes walked around the shop, his gaze never leaving the calligraphy on the wall. A few guards stood at the door and occasionally glanced at the young man in the room. Their eyes were full of surprise. Professor Feng was not too surprised. Although this Li Yi's personality was mischievous, his talent was real. No one could deny this. Official Yan's plaque was for sure this time. As the man in embroidered robes walked around, he couldn't help but click his tongue in surprise. These paintings were strange and unconventional. He had never seen such a painting technique in his life. However, what shocked him was the various poems inscribed on the paintings. Good calligraphy. The person who inscribed these poems was definitely a master in calligraphy. If it wasn't for the fact that he was very familiar with the calligraphy of the few famous calligraphy masters in the Jing Kingdom, he would certainly have thought that the other person was one of them. Young man, did these paintings really come from your hands? The man in embroidered robes still couldn't believe that the master he had wanted to meet was actually such a young man. He looked at Li Yi and asked. Li Yi raised his hands in a salute and said, I had nothing better to do, so I casually wrote and drew. Please excuse me, sir. Magistrate Dong had already introduced him earlier. The person in front of him was a high-ranking official from the capital. Although he didn't know his position, he was certainly much more important than a small county officer like him. He couldn't be lacking in the necessary etiquette. I had nothing better to do, so I casually wrote and drew. A rare blush appeared on the man in embroidered robes' face. He had studied this field for more than 20 years, but he couldn't even compare to a young man who casually wrote and drew, in front of an old friend. This old face was a bit embarrassing. Originally, he had thought that if there really was an unknown master hiding in Qing and Fu, he would definitely not miss this opportunity. He would prepare gifts, pay a visit, and receive some guidance. Perhaps then, he would break through the difficult situation that he had been stuck in for a few years. However, the master had been changed to a young person, so naturally, it wasn't so easy to ask for guidance. Seeing the conflicted expression on his face, Prefectural Magistrate Dong found it funny and said, If I remember correctly, Brother Yan just said that if the words on the signboard were truly written by County Lieutenant Li, I should eat it. I wonder if Assistant Minister Yan's words still count. Of course it counts. The man in embroidered robes snorted coldly and said, My words have always carried enormous weight. When have I ever gone back on my word? Guijiang, take down that signboard. We'll use it to accompany the wine when we get back. He strode to the door and ordered a guard. The guard didn't hesitate either. He leaped up and tapped twice on the wall. His entire body climbed onto the signboard, and he quickly removed the signboard with the words Rue Square written on it. He held the signboard firmly as he jumped to the ground. The action of tearing down the plaque was done in one go, natural and smooth. It was obvious that this was not the first time he had done this. This scene made Professor Feng's jaw drop. Magistrate Dong helplessly rubbed the space between his brows. Based on his personality, he should have known, when he was in the capital, he didn't know how many plaques had been taken down by him. It was to the extent that people who had hired a master to inscribe their inscriptions would take down their plaques and hide them at night to prevent them from being stolen at night. He probably had his eyes on this signboard from the very beginning. Magistrate Dong looked up to the sky and sighed. If he had known earlier, he would have taken the initiative to gain the upper hand. He wouldn't have let this fellow have it so easily. One had to know that he had his eyes on this signboard a long time ago. As for asking Li Yi to specially inscribe his inscription, with his status, he couldn't bring himself to do it. It's rare to come across such a good dish to go with wine today. Brother Wen Yun, take your time and drink your tea. I'll make a move first. The man in embroidered robes laughed heartily and strode out. Stealing in broad daylight. Yen, do you still have any shame? Magistrate Dong shouted from inside the room. How can the affairs of a scholar be described as stealing? The man in embroidered robes laughed wildly. The guard carrying the signboard followed closely behind the man in embroidered robes. Under Li Yi's astonished gaze, he disappeared into the crowd. He tore down the signboard just like that. He didn't even ask for the shop owner's opinion. Wasn't he being too damn direct? He even said he was a high-ranking official from the capital. Were all officials in the capital like this? That's his personality. He's obsessed with calligraphy and has torn down countless signboards in his life. Now that this signboard is in his hands, I'm afraid he won't be able to get it back. Magistrate Dong stood up and said somewhat helplessly, I will compensate you for the losses here. What else could Li Yi say? In the Jing kingdom, from the emperor and princess to the low-ranking officials, they were all the same. They liked to take other people's things for free. You can take away the signboard, but at the very least, you should at least show some appreciation, right? Li Yi quickly got what he wanted. A man walked in and placed a piece of paper on the table. He said, This is my lord's name card. If you come to the capital, you can use this name card to find him at the Yen Manor. At first, Li Yi thought it was a banknote. After looking at it for a while, he found that there was nothing on the paper except for the word yen. Was this the so-called name card? There wasn't even a complete name. It was extremely sloppy. Although the shop owner didn't accept money when the signboard was made, he wouldn't have exchanged it for such a useless piece of paper. He casually threw the piece of paper on the table. The signboard had been taken away by that guy. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to get it back. After a while, when the Rui workshop reopened, he would have to order another one. Professor Feng saw that Li Yi didn't think much of Sir Yan's name card and reminded him, don't underestimate this name card. Sir Yan is an assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. The appointment, dismissal, examination, promotion, and transfer of civil officials are all handled by the Ministry of Personnel. Making friends with Sir Yan won't be bad for your future promotion. Li Yi didn't know the background of the man in embroidered robes, but Professor Feng couldn't be clearer about it. The Yan family was considered a large family in the Jing kingdom. Many people in the family held high positions and were deeply trusted by His Majesty. Making friends with the Yan family would certainly make his career much smoother. Although the two of them didn't see eye to eye, Professor Feng only disliked him for not making progress. This was the professional quality of being a professor of the prefectural school. There were no personal grudges. His kind reminder this time was only in the hope that he could change his bad habits and work hard to obtain scholarly honors. Serving the country as soon as possible was the right path. Li Yi didn't expect Professor Feng to say these words to him. Seeing the sincerity in his tone, he was slightly moved. Although the two of them didn't get along, it was undeniable that Professor Feng was a true gentleman. Putting away the name card, Li Yi bowed to him with a solemn expression and said, "I'll remember it." "You're worth teaching." Professor Feng's expression softened and he said with satisfaction when he saw the change in him. He had once again guided a young man with limitless potential from the wrong path to the right path. He felt a great sense of accomplishment. This was the most talented and capable young man he had ever seen. Professor Feng really didn't want him to live a mediocre life, so he said again, "With your talent, it's a waste of your talent to be a mere county lieutenant. I have many friends in the capital who can write a few recommendation letters for you. You can go out and visit them. Coupled with your relationship with Sir Yen, if they jointly recommend you to His Majesty, I'm afraid you'll definitely become a county magistrate. As long as you work hard and make some achievements, there's a high chance that you'll be transferred to the capital in 10 years. Within 20 years, it's not impossible for you to be in the imperial court." Professor Feng's spittle flew everywhere as he spoke. It was as if his blood was about to boil. "Cough, thank you, Professor Feng. It's just that I've yet to recover from my injuries. Let's talk about this another time." Li Yi said awkwardly as he covered his chest and coughed a few times. "What do you mean we'll talk about it in the future? Young man, how can you be so ignorant?" Professor Feng frowned and reprimanded him again. "We are scholars, and it is our duty to serve the country." Li Yi rubbed his slightly swollen head. "This old man, here he comes again." Chapter 271. Since you are favored by the princess, you should be diligent in the future. Don't say that you don't want to be an official anymore. I really hope to see the day when you and I become officials in the same court. Magistrate Dong said a few words of encouragement and then left with Professor Feng. It was obvious that he saw Li Yi as a junior with a bright future. Professor Feng said a few words. When he left, he still felt that although this seedling had changed, the change was not complete and there was still a lot of room for improvement. If he could become a top official in the future, he could also boast to his old friends that he was the one who made the minister or the prime minister realize their mistakes and work hard to get to where they are today. Li Yi put away the name card. He didn't want to go to the capital to visit Lord Yen. However, according to Professor Feng, this piece of paper seemed to be worth a penny. He just didn't know how much it could be sold for, but it would definitely be worth 100 taels. After closing the door, he saw Xiao Huan coming out of the tile-roofed house with red eyes. He thought that someone bullied her. Before he had time to ask her, the little servant girl took the initiative to say that she was touched by the love between Ning Kaichen and Nie Xiaoqian. The little girl's body was not yet mature, but she was very emotional. When she heard the story for the first time, she cried. She must have cried a lot just now. She was a little depressed at first, but after Li Yi bought her a sugar figurine, she held it in her hand and couldn't bear to eat it. She just looked at it. Li Yi bit off the head of the sugar figurine, and the rest was easily eaten by Xiao Huan. Li Yi wandered on the streets of the prefecture with the little servant girl. At the same time, the princess and her people, who were travel-worn, finally arrived at the capital after a few days of travel. There were already imperial guards waiting outside the city. They cleared the way, leaving a trail of dust behind them to the palace. Is this the celestial punishment that Emingzu mentioned in the letter? In the main hall, Emperor Jing put his hands behind his back and looked at a few fist-sized, black clay jars on the table. He couldn't hide the doubt on his face. Yes, father. Don't look down on these small jars. Although they are small, they have the power to destroy the world. After many days of travel, Emingsu couldn't hide the exhaustion on her face. But the matter of celestial punishment was too important. After entering the palace, she didn't take any rest and put it on her father's desk as quickly as possible. Emperor Jing still had some doubt on his face. How could the power of celestial punishment be in the hands of a human? Even he, as the emperor, didn't have this qualification. Changde, who had been accompanying Emperor Jing, also had a trace of suspicion on his old face. It was incredible that such a small thing had the power to destroy the world. His Majesty had let him read the letter, and he still had a lot of doubts about the princess's description. Seeing is believing. Li Mingzhu knew that this matter sounded unbelievable. If she did not see it with her own eyes, she would not have believed it no matter what. If father doesn't believe it, you can see the power of this thing with your own eyes. Okay. Emperor Jing laughed and said, I will personally see how it can destroy the world. After saying that, he reached out to pick up the clay jar on the table. Father, you can't. Li Mingzhu moved faster than him and picked up the heaven's punishment first. She looked at Emperor Jing, who looked at her in confusion, and explained, this thing is extremely dangerous. If you are not careful, it will be triggered. Father is the emperor, so you can't take risks. She turned to look at Changde and said, let Chief Chang do it. When Changde heard this, the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch, but he quickly said, Princess is right. Your Majesty's body is priceless. You can't take risks. Let this old servant do it for you. He looked back at Emingsu and asked, may I ask, Princess, how do I use this thing? Use a match to ignite the wire outside. Emingsu pointed to the wire outside the clay jar and said. Seeing that Chief Chang took out a match and seemed to be about to carry out this great experiment in this palace, Mingzhu's heart suddenly jumped and she shouted, wait. Your Highness, is there anything else? Changde raised his head and looked at her with a puzzled face. Emingsu glared at him and said, it's too dangerous here. Take it outside and try it. She had seen the power of celestial punishment countless times, especially under the inspiration of Li Yi. After several days and nights of improvement by Shen Liang, the power had increased by more than one level. If it was really triggered in this palace, all of them would be buried inside if they were not careful. Chief Steward Chang didn't understand how dangerous a small jar could be with so many guards around His Majesty. Her Highness was being a little too careful. Then listen to Emingsu and go outside. Emperor Jing did not care and said with a smile. His Majesty had spoken. Although he felt that it was not necessary, Changde still went out. Of course, the celestial punishment for the experiment would not be mixed with iron nails and pieces of broken iron. This thing could even penetrate the wall. If something happened to his imperial father, no one could bear the responsibility. Not to mention the iron pieces, even the broken clay jar was very dangerous when it exploded. A guard of the princess's residence lost an arm because of this. If it was not for another person who kicked him at the critical moment, he would have to pay the price of more than just an arm. Originally, when he walked out of the palace, Changde was ready to light the thing in his hand and throw it out. However, the princess insisted on finding an abandoned small courtyard to experiment. He was very puzzled that Princess Yongle, who had always been bold since she was a child, suddenly became so timid. However, he could not disobey the princess's orders. He had no choice but to choose an abandoned palace, lit the fuse with a match, and threw it in. Boom! Changde, who was standing under the wall of the palace, only heard the princess shout, "Be careful," from afar. There was a loud rumbling sound behind him. He, who was disturbed by the loud sound, even forgot to dodge and was crushed under the collapsed wall of the palace. After the loud sound, there was a dead silence. The indifferent look on Emperor Jing's face disappeared and was flushed. He covered his chest and gasped for breath. "Imperial doctor, call the imperial doctor." The dozen or so guards around them were already in a mess. Some of them were kneeling on the ground and kowtowing. Some of them were standing on the ground with pale faces and weak legs. Finally, one of them recovered and ran to find the imperial physician. In the distance, there were even more panicked figures. The entire imperial palace was in an uproar because of this earth-shattering sound. Crash! A pile of bricks and stones flew out from the collapsed palace wall. Changde, whose clothes were tattered and his face was covered with dust, climbed up and patted the dust on his body. His old face was full of horror. The palace wall collapsed and there was a huge scorched pit at the foot of the wall. The palace was in a mess. Was this the power of the celestial punishment? Chapter 272. Seeing the palace wall turn into rubble in front of him, Changde finally realized the true power of the heavenly punishment. His tattered clothes were instantly drenched in sweat. No one had thought that the power of the heavenly punishment would be so terrifying. The princess was not exaggerating at all. Destroying the world, this was really destroying the world. Just now, he even felt the ground under his feet shake. When he thought that he wanted to experiment in the palace, cold sweat appeared on his forehead again. If he really did that just now, the palace would definitely be destroyed. Even if something happened to His Majesty, it would not be enough for him, Changde, to die 10,000 times. For a moment, Changde's heart was filled with deep gratitude towards the princess. At this time, dozens of armored guards had surrounded the place. Several eunuchs dressed in grey appeared beside Jing Emperor and looked around vigilantly. Jing Emperor panted for a while and his breathing gradually stabilized. His face was still a little flushed. He waved his hand to shake off the guards who were supporting him and drove away the imperial doctor who was panting as he ran over. He strode towards the direction of the collapsed palace wall. Looking at the grey and black ground and rubble, Jing Emperor was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he laughed out loud. Ha! What a heavenly punishment, what a heavenly punishment. With this divine object, it is enough to protect the stability of our Jing kingdom for decades. A small black clay pot had such power that even the sturdy palace wall could not withstand the power of the heavenly punishment. It could be imagined that if a few dozen or even dozens of them attacked at the same time, it could really be said to be destroying the world. Under the power of the heavenly punishment, even the sturdy city wall would be easily destroyed like tofu. The Jing kingdom had been weak for a long time and there were strong enemies eyeing it. In these years, he had worked hard to manage a big country to the current situation it was in. It was not easy to find a moment of stability, but the torture of illness had become more and more serious. When he followed the late emperor, it would be the time when the stability and peace of the Jing kingdom would be disrupted. Because of this, he often could not eat or sleep in peace. However, the appearance of such a national treasure was like a ray of light in the darkness, making him seem to see infinite hope. With the Jing country's current national strength, they didn't need to expand their territory, but with this object as a deterrent, it was likely that no one would dare to have any ideas about the Jing country. This old servant congratulates His Majesty and the Jing kingdom. Changde had served Emperor Jing for decades. How could he not know what he was thinking? A smile also appeared on his wrinkled face. He knelt on one knee and said loudly, "Voila!" The surrounding guards immediately knelt down as well. Although they didn't know what was going on, they still knew what was going on. Their orderly and loud voices spread far and wide, resounding throughout the entire palace. Congratulations to His Majesty and the Jing kingdom. Congratulations to His Majesty and the Jing kingdom. Congratulations to His Majesty and the Jing kingdom. In the letter, Emingsu said that this item can be used as a weapon to break a city. At the same time, it is also a treasure to kill enemies on the battlefield. The broken pieces of the jar are embedded in the wall. If it is used on the battlefield, it will immediately become a hell on earth. In the palace, Emperor Jing looked at the few jars on the table and nodded with satisfaction. Father, these are only used for testing. The real sky punishment will be mixed with iron nails and pieces to increase its power. Once it explodes, there will be no survivors within 3 feet. Mingzu pointed at the jar on the table and said. Changde heard this and took a deep breath. Even the broken jars could be embedded in the wall. What kind of power was that? If it was an iron weapon, if the sky punishment that he ignited was like what the princess said, he would have been turned into a sieve by now. An individual's martial strength was not worth mentioning in front of the power of heaven. After being stunned for a moment, Emperor Jing's smile became wider. He said the word good a few times in a row. Suddenly, a trace of sharpness appeared in his eyes. Qi Kingdom, the new year is coming. I plan to give you a big gift. I hope you will like it. He seemed to have seen the scene of the Qi Kingdom soldiers fleeing in panic in front of the sky punishment. He felt the depression that had accumulated in his heart for a long time was swept away. He turned to look at Mingzu and asked, "How much does it cost?" Mingzu said respectfully, "Father, it is easy to make. The materials used are cheap and the cost is very low." The sky punishment was powerful. Even if it was expensive to make, Emperor Jing would not give it up. Now that he heard that it was cheap, he was overjoyed. After thinking for a while, he looked at her and asked, "Who made it? Where is he now?" A trace of hesitation flashed on Mingzhu's face, but it quickly disappeared. She said, "The one who made the sky punishment was a performer called Shen Liang in Qing and Prefecture. His ancestors were all cigarette makers. He accidentally discovered the formula of the sky punishment. After I learned about it, I immediately controlled him and brought him to the capital. The people of the princess's mansion also participated in the production of the sky punishment. However, only Shen Liang and I know the core formula." Emperor Jing let out a long sigh of relief. The last trace of worry in his heart was gone. In the future, Shen Liang will be responsible for supervising the production of the sky punishment. He is not allowed to contact outsiders. I will send people to mark out a place outside the city for the research and development of the sky punishment. In addition, I will send 50 craftsmen and 1,000 imperial guards to the war zone. I want to see whether the soldiers of the Qi Kingdom are more powerful, or the power of the Jing Kingdom. Emperor Jing issued several orders in a row. When he looked back and saw the tired expression on his daughter's face, he said softly, "It has been hard on you. Go back and rest. I will leave the rest to you." "Father, this is the formula of the sky punishment." Mingzu nodded. She was indeed tired after the long journey. After offering the formula of the gunpowder, she slowly left the palace. Emperor Jing took the formula and looked at it for a long time. He picked up a clay pot and carefully examined it in his hand. Changde personally felt the power and terror of this thing. He wanted to stay far away from this palace. When he saw the emperor pick up the sky punishment, he hurriedly said, "Your Majesty." Emperor Jing waved his hand and interrupted him. He also put the clay pot back to its original position. "You are indeed the person I like. Li, I am really curious. How many blessings can you bring to the Jing Kingdom?" Emperor Jing said slowly. If Mingzu was here, she would definitely be shocked by his words at this moment. Changde thought for a while and said, "Your Majesty, the matter of the sky punishment is unusual. Do you want to?" Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "No need. Mingzu will not choose the wrong person. I will not choose the wrong person either. Since there is a Shen Liang, there will definitely be a second and a third one. Pass down the order. Strictly prohibit the sale of saltpeter and sulfur. Let the government buy them all." After the order was issued, someone behind him immediately responded and walked out of the palace. Mingzu has never lied to me before. This is the first time. You are more capable than I thought. Thinking of the young man who talked to him in the garden of the prince's residence, a strange smile appeared on Emperor Jing's face. How should I reward you for offering such an important weapon of the country? Forget it. It's almost the end of the year. I will let you be free for a few more days. After Emperor Jing muttered a few words to himself, he issued a few more orders. Chapter 273. According to the customs of the royal family, after a princess came of age, she could no longer stay in the palace. Although she didn't have to go to a fief, she still had to build her own residence outside the palace. Princesses who lived in the palace were either underage or very favored. Princesses like Princess Yongle, who had passed the age of 15 but still had their own residence in the palace and didn't have to leave the palace, were few and far between. Many imperial censors submitted memorials about this, but they were all suppressed by the emperor. This showed how much he liked Princess Yongle. Of course, Princess Yongle was the daughter of the empress, the only daughter of the emperor and the empress. It was very normal for her to have such preferential treatment. Mingzu walked out of the hall, and the old woman waiting outside followed behind her. They walked towards a palace in the rear palace. Mingzu said as they walked, Imperial Father wants to send 50 craftsmen to the battlefield. Let Shenliang go with them. Half of the people in the princess residence who participated in making Tianfa will go with them as well. Tianfa is too dangerous, they have to be careful at all times. Without experiencing it for themselves, they didn't know how dangerous Tianfa was. Even if they knew the recipe, it would be a disaster if they weren't careful. The people of the princess residence had memorized all the rules and regulations that Li Yi had laid out for her. With them following her, it would be much safer. Don't worry, princess. I will arrange it immediately when I return. The old woman responded. Then, a trace of hesitation appeared on her face. She whispered a few more words in her ear. What? Imperial Father already knows. She stopped and her expression changed. The old woman nodded and said, His Majesty's personal palace maids all know about this. It's not a secret. Let him see me immediately. Mingzhu's expression darkened. Nanny, why is the princess looking for me? In the princess residence, a young man followed the old woman and asked in confusion. Naturally, this old woman doesn't know about the princess. The old woman said faintly and pointed to the back garden of the princess residence. The princess is there. Go there yourself. The man saw a figure in the garden and suppressed the uneasiness in his heart. He strode over. Princess. He said respectfully and stood at the back, waiting quietly. Mingzu turned her head and a trace of disappointment appeared on her face as she said, Guard Lu, you've been working in the princess residence for quite some time, right? Princess, I am indebted to the princess for her promotion. I have been in the princess residence for 5 years. The young man said slowly. From tomorrow onwards, you will be Shenliang's personal bodyguard. Tian Fa's matter is of great importance. You must ensure that the secret formula will not be leaked, and you must not let anything happen to Shenliang. Mingzu looked at a plum blossom that had yet to bloom in the garden as she spoke plainly. As if he had thought of something, the young man's face suddenly turned pale. His knees went soft, and he knelt down. He kowtowed as if he was pounding garlic and shouted, Thank you, Your Highness. From now on, as long as the secret recipe exists, this subordinate will exist. The secret recipe is faulty, this subordinate will atone for it with his life. 1,000 imperial guards left the imperial palace in the middle of the night. The sound of the horses' hooves on the stone floor seemed to shake the entire capital. No one knew what had happened. The people in the city all closed their doors and windows and hid in their homes. After the dust settled, pairs of eyes peeked out from the cracks in the doors, guessing what had happened. The palace had not made such a big move in a long time. As for the officials in the capital and the rich and noble families, many of them did not sleep the whole night. Their backs were drenched in cold sweat. For so many imperial guards to be mobilized, something big must have happened. They just didn't know who would be the unlucky one this time. They just hoped it wouldn't be them. When the sky brightened and nothing special happened, everyone could finally relax. For a moment, the rich and noble families all sent out carriages and horses. Officials of all levels walked around each other to gather information. Compared to this matter, the matter of the princess residence changing the guard leader was not worth mentioning. At the same time, in the faraway Qin and prefectural city, it was far from the somber atmosphere of the capital. As the new year approached, the prefectural city became livelier day by day. After a busy year, it was finally the day when everything could rest. Other than the peddlers and a few people with special professions, most people would choose to give themselves a holiday and enjoy life. The large and small brothels inside and outside the city were packed from morning to night. In particular, the theaters in the prefectural city, as well as the large brothels that had been built outside the city, became the favorite place of entertainment for most people. There were all kinds of performances, puppet shows, movie shows, and all kinds of programs. It was enough to dazzle the eyes. If one was tired of these, they could go to the large brothels to watch the stage plays. They were all new plays and were brilliant. It was definitely worth spending a few copper coins for them. In order to maintain the security in the city, the government sent out more bailiffs. From time to time, the soldiers of the city defense could be seen walking on the street. Sometimes, bailiffs were mixed in the crowd. The roadside vendors greeted them warmly and gave them hot buns and cakes. The bailiffs did not refuse. They took a bite with a smile and continued to patrol. Although he felt that he could beat a cow to death with his current physical condition, Li Yi was still in a state of recuperation. Anyway, before Her Highness left, she had asked for a long sick leave for him. The task of maintaining the security was handed over to County Magistrate Liu. After all, capable people should do more work. As for ordinary small cases, with Liu Yi's help, there wouldn't be any problems. This kid was born to do this. No one knew how he had been muddle-headed in the past, but this time, he suddenly became enlightened. He had solved several old cases, and his reputation had spread across several counties. It was said that no criminal could hold on for the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn under his hands. This was how a qualified subordinate should be. Li Yi was extremely proud of his discerning eyes. When he woke up, he washed his face with cold water. After shivering for a while, he suddenly felt refreshed. Today was the Lunar New Year. According to the customs here, people should start to buy New Year's goods and offer sacrifices to the kitchen god. The customs of the Lunar New Year in later generations were different in different places. Li Yi did not know how to celebrate the Lunar New Year here. It was enough for Xiao Huan and Rui to know. After what happened last time, they no longer lit the stove at home at night. But they still lit the fire every morning. For the first time, Li Yi felt that carbon monoxide was also a good thing. It could actually promote the relationship between husband and wife. He was not Lu Xiaohui. He could not resist sleeping with such a beautiful wife every night. Although he had not broken through the last line of defense, he had taken a lot of advantages. It was just that he felt a little uncomfortable when he got up in the morning. When Rui brought him toiletries, her face was always red. Chapter 274. After the Little New Year, there were only 6 or 7 days left before the Spring Festival. The Little New Year's Day was considered a relatively important festival. Early in the morning, Xiao Huan took a rag and carefully wiped every room. Even Mississippi Liu was sweeping the courtyard with a broom, which was a rare occurrence. although the courtyard was originally so clean that there was not even a single fallen leaf. Just now, Zhu Zi ran over and gave a thick stack of window flowers. They were of different shapes and were extremely beautiful. Xiao Huan said that Aunt Fang's skill in cutting window flowers was unique in the village. She would send some to her house every year. After saying that, she took the window flowers and went into the house to find paste. When Li Yi walked out of the courtyard, he saw that every household was busy. Even the naughty children were not idle. Each of them took a small broom and swept in front of the door. As they swept, it became a broom war. Dust flew everywhere and screams could be heard. After a while, an adult ran out of the courtyard and dragged the naughty children back home by their ears. It did not matter if it was a festival or not to beat children. After a while, the naughty children's screams came from inside. When he walked out of the gate of the house, the atmosphere of the new year was everywhere. Counting the days, he had been here for a full half a year. Before he had time to reminisce, a clear voice came from behind him. "Excuse me, does Lu Rui live here?" Li Yi turned around and saw a young girl about the same age as Rui standing behind him. She was carrying a small bag on her back and holding a long sword in her hand. She was standing there and looking at him. "Young master, what's wrong?" A man strode out from inside and stood beside Li Yi. "Why are you looking for Rui?" Li Yi looked at her and asked. Looking at the young girl's attire, she looked like a person from Jianghu. It seemed that she did not have good intentions. "She is indeed here." A hint of understanding appeared on the young girl's face. She said lightly and strode into the house. "Stop." This young girl was obviously looking for trouble. How could old Su, who was standing beside Li Yi, let her enter so easily? He reached out to grab her shoulder. "Humph, your martial arts are too weak. I won't fight with you." The girl lightly struck out with her palm and landed it on old Su's shoulder. Old Su involuntarily took a few steps back and leaned against the door to stabilize himself. Just as he was about to fight again, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "There's no rush. Let's see what she wants first." She didn't look like she was here for revenge. Ever since all the bandits from the Greenwood Forest were killed, they hadn't met anyone else who was blind. Li Yi was not worried at all. Rui had always been modest about her martial arts skills. Last time, he indirectly asked Mississippi Lu about it, and the answer he got was that the number of people in the entire Jing kingdom who could defeat his sister could be counted on one hand. Li Yi looked left and right, looking up and down, but he didn't feel that this hand included the girl. "You're going the wrong way. See? The person you're looking for is in the yard over there." Seeing the girl wander around the house like a headless fly, Li Yi kindly pointed her in the right direction. "Young master, this girl is..." Fang walked out of his yard and looked at the strange girl, asking in confusion. Li Yi shook his head, indicating that he didn't know either. The girl entered the yard with a small bag on her back. When she looked up, she saw a woman about her age, or maybe just a little older, standing in the yard, sweeping with a broom in her hand. The first time she saw the woman, she knew she was a master. "You're Lu Rui, the number 1 on the Wulin hero list and the heaven list." The girl untied the small bag on her back and threw it aside. With a flash of cold light, she pulled out the long sword in her hand and held it in front of her chest. She bowed to the woman in front of her and said, "I want to challenge you. If I win, you have to give up your number 1 position on the heaven list to me." Wulin hero list. What's that? Fang was dumbfounded. He only understood that the girl wanted to challenge the second young mistress. As for the rest, he didn't understand a single word. Fang and the others didn't understand, but Li Yi did. The Wulin hero list was something that Old Man Sun had created not long ago under his instructions. After a comprehensive analysis of the strength and reputation of the masters in Wulin, the ranking would be made. The higher the ranking, the stronger the master. This list was mainly divided into the heaven list, the earth list, and the mortal list. The heaven list was the strongest, followed by the earth list, and then the mortal list. Above these three lists, there was a guru list. However, there were only a few people on the guru list. Every one of them was a famous guru master in Wulin. With a stomp of their feet, the whole Wulin would shake. The heaven list, the earth list, and the mortal list had 100 people on each list. Of course, time was limited, so Oldman's son and a few old friends had only sorted out 50 people on the heaven list. In order to ensure the authority of the list, Wu found a few friends in the martial arts world to participate in the ranking of the list. Some storytellers in the brothels outside the city made the deeds of the heroes on the list into stories, 1 to 10, 10 to 100. Soon, even an 8-year-old child was familiar with the affairs of the martial arts world. Originally, the people of the martial arts world did not care much about these things. However, the person who made the list seemed to be very familiar with the martial arts world. The heaven list almost covered all the famous top experts in the martial arts world. There was also a very detailed explanation of their ranking order. It was able to convince people. Gradually, it actually gained the recognition of most people. At this time, many people couldn't sit still. Needless to say, those on the guru list were all seniors who had dominated Wulin for decades. They didn't dare to compare with them. The few people at the top of the heaven list had outstanding achievements, so they didn't have any objections to being ranked in front of them. For example, the number 1 woman on the heaven list, surnamed Lu, in the past 2 years, the number of masters who had fallen in her hands could not be counted. Dozens of Lulin masters went to find trouble with her, but none of them returned. They were sincerely convinced that she was ranked first. However, those who were on the list were naturally secretly delighted. People lived in this world for nothing more than fame and profit. No matter how high one's martial arts was, it was useless if others didn't know about it. Everyone hoped that their strength would be recognized by others. For scholars, there was a Zhuang Yuan, Bang Yan, and Tanhua in the imperial examinations. For martial artists, there was a Wulin hero list. It was a very normal thing. However, although there was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts, which martial artist would be willing to admit that they were second? Li Si, who was ranked 50th on the heaven list, after a little joy, was quickly dissatisfied. That bastard Zhang San was actually ranked 49th on the heaven list. Why was he ranked ahead of him? That bastard was obviously no match for him. If he could defeat him, wouldn't his ranking increase? Little did he know that Zhang San, who was ranked 49th, was also feeling uncomfortable. Years ago, he had fought with Wang Er, who was ranked 48th on the heaven list. Although he lost, he had improved rapidly in the past few years. If he met him again, the outcome was uncertain. Why was he ranked ahead of him? Also, who was that Zhao Yuanwei, who was ranked 40th? Was there such a person in the martial arts world? Of course, those who were not on the list were not very satisfied either. They thought that their strength was greater than those on the list. Why were they not on the list? Of course, no one would think of finding those storytellers to add themselves to the list. That would be laughed at by their peers in the martial arts world. Moreover, they did not know where the list came from. They could not find the person at all. Moreover, he was so familiar with the martial arts world. It meant that he must be someone in the martial arts world. There was no doubt about this. Since he had already acknowledged this list, of course he had to rely on his own strength to get on it. The others on the list could not be underestimated. However, the guy ranked 40th was unheard of. He was the best way to make a name for himself. In short, the martial arts world, which had never been peaceful, was once again stirred up because of this list. Although it could not be described as a reign of terror, the popularity of martial arts competitions was at its peak in the past few decades. Seeing the girl holding a sword in her hand and looking at Rui with an eager expression on her face, Li Yi rubbed the area between his eyebrows, feeling a slight headache. It seemed that he had inadvertently brought quite a bit of trouble to Rui. Chapter 275. Lu Rui raised her head and glanced at the girl. She continued to sweep the yard. She had heard about the Wulin hero ranking and was unhappy that her name was not on it. If her sister had not stopped her, she would have gone to look for trouble with the second master on the heaven list. She had completely mastered the essence of Tai Chi sword. After her swordsmanship improved, she faced a new bottleneck. This time, it would not be easy to break through. A goal that was too far away would always make people lose motivation. She did not practice much these days. According to Li Yi's story, sweeping was also a form of cultivation, so she decided to try her best. However, although her swordsmanship did not improve, she was much calmer. When she was free, she would sweep the yard with a broom. The yard was cleaner than ever. "Excuse me," she said without looking up when she swept the girl's feet. "According to the rules of Jianghu, if you don't accept my challenge, the first place on the heaven list will be mine." The girl was not angry when she was ignored. She did not realize that she had recognized the wrong person. She only knew that the girl in front of her was not simple. The first place on the heaven list was a girl. Did that mean that she was the most powerful girl in the Jing kingdom, apart from the grandmasters? Fong crossed his arms and looked like he was watching a show. This girl was really brave to challenge the elder Mississippi. He did not expect that she would mistake the second miss for the elder Mississippi. He did not know if she was lucky or unlucky. In terms of martial arts, the elder miss was definitely more powerful. However, the elder miss was kind and knew when to stop. As for the second miss, she never showed mercy when she fought. "I didn't expect the first place on the heaven list to have such little courage." The girl pouted and turned to leave. "I will tell them that Lu Rui is just a so-so. She does not even have the courage to accept a challenge. How can she be the first?" As soon as the words left her mouth, her expression suddenly changed. She whipped her head around, only to find a fair hand resting on her slender neck. Even if she was a martial arts master, the neck was her weakest part. If the hand exerted a little force, her neck would be broken. "This is a sneak attack." She glared at him and said, unconvinced. Lu Rui held the broom in one hand and let go of her neck with the other. He made a "please" gesture. She could ignore this young girl's challenge, but she would not allow her to tarnish her sister's reputation. The girl stood in front of her with a sword in her hand and asked, "You don't need a weapon?" Lu Rui was too lazy to respond. Her opponent was this little girl, and she did not even have the interest to draw her sword. "Be careful." To a true expert, having or not having a weapon didn't make much of a difference. When she turned around to leave just now, she actually had her guard up, but she still managed to grab his neck. This was enough for him to be careful. When he opened his mouth, the long sword was like a spirit snake, swallowing and spitting out cold light as it pierced forward. Her vision blurred, and the figure of the woman in front of her disappeared. Then, she felt a tightness on her neck, and that white palm appeared on her neck again. "You fought. You can go." Lu Rui released his hand from her neck and continued to sweep the dust on the ground with the broom. Li Yi looked at her with envy. She was calm, carefree, and calm. This was the attitude that a master should have. She had hit the opponent's confidence several times. Even if she lost, she had to make her lose wholeheartedly. In the end, she said calmly, "With your talent, go back and practice hard for 30 years, then come back to me." The temperament of a grandmaster was undoubtedly revealed. Of course, there was a small risk in doing this. If the challenger had the halo of a protagonist, after being humiliated, he would suddenly comprehend a peerless martial art. 3 years later, he would come back again and kill the grandmaster with his sword. At the same time, he would put on an annual drama of a grassroots counterattack. Li Yi did not see the counterattack. The development of the story was a little different from what he had expected. The young girl stood still for a moment, and suddenly knelt on one knee. She held the sword with both hands and said loudly, "I can't beat you. Please accept me as your disciple." The young girl's turn was very quick. Fang's mouth opened wide, and his jaw almost dropped. Li Yi looked at her in surprise. He suddenly felt that the challenge was just a cover. Her ultimate goal was to become his disciple. A hint of surprise flashed in Lu Rui's beautiful eyes, but it was soon hidden. She shook her head and said, "You've got the wrong person. I'm not the person you're looking for, and I won't accept you as my disciple. You're much more powerful than me. Only by becoming your disciple can I learn more powerful martial arts. I won't give up." The young girl raised her head and said firmly. The purpose of her trip was to become a disciple. Although she didn't know how good the legendary Lu Rui's martial arts were, the woman in front of her, who was not much older than her, was the most powerful person she had ever seen in her life. Thus, she immediately made up her mind. She picked up the small bag on the ground and carried it on her back. Then she picked up another broom from the corner and swept behind Lu Rui. "Young master, do you want to kick her out?" Fang asked tentatively. "No need. Let her sweep if she wants to," Lu Rui said indifferently before Li Yi could answer. She put down the broom and went into the house. Xiao Huan held Rui's hand and walked out of the house. She asked Li Yi, "Young master, when are we going out to buy?" Who's this sister?" He, let's do it. 40 on the hero ranking and heaven ranking. Congratulations, Brother Zhao. I didn't expect Brother Zhao to be so secretive. Brother Zhao was too humble in the past. We were all fooled by you. After we drink our fill, we must learn from Brother Zhao. Chuzhou, Shangqing. In Squire Zhao's house, more than 10 Jianghu people drank to their heart's content. They all toasted a man with a goatee sitting at the head of the table. I don't know who made this up. How can I get a place on the hero ranking? Squire Zhao said with a dry laugh. He knew his own strength very well. He had some life-saving methods that others didn't know about, but he was definitely not that powerful. Brother Zhao, you are wrong. The hero ranking has been recognized by the people of the Jianghu. Everyone is proud to be on the hero ranking. Brother Zhao, you don't have to be humble anymore, someone said with a wave of his hand. Squire Zhao didn't explain this time. This matter was indeed very useful for increasing his reputation. It could probably attract more Jianghu people to join him. It was not a bad thing. Let's drink. He laughed and temporarily changed the topic. Bang! While everyone was drinking happily, there was suddenly a muffled sound from the side. The door of the Zhao mansion collapsed and dust flew up. A burly figure walked in from outside. Who are you? After being stunned for a moment, someone immediately put down his wine bowl and walked over angrily. How dare he destroy the door of the Zhao mansion in front of so many people? Was he looking down on them? He walked to the side of the burly man and was about to stop him, but he was punched by the burly man. He fell to the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with fear. Seeing this, the people around the table all stood up with murderous gazes. I am Pound of Qingzhou, ranked 41st on the heaven roll. Which one of you is Squire Zhao? I want to see who is ranked ahead of me. The burly man laughed wildly. His voice was as loud as a giant bell. So you are a master on the heaven roll. Sorry for not recognizing you. A man from Qingzhou dares to challenge Chuzhou. Do you think there is no one in Chuzhou? Humph, you are only ranked 41st on the heaven roll. How can you be compared to our brother Zhao? Yes, brother Zhao, show him your power. Hearing that this person was only ranked 41st on the heaven roll, behind Squire Zhao, everyone's faces relaxed and they urged him. No one noticed that Zhao Yuanwei, who was hiding at the back of the crowd, was pale as a sheet. Chapter 276. A few years ago, when he could only eat one meal at a time, it was already good enough to have a bowl of porridge during Chinese New Year. Now that he was not short of money, he could not continue living like that. Shopping for Chinese New Year goods was a must. After walking around the streets, Li Yi could not carry all the things he bought with his 2 hands. "Martial uncle, let me carry it." The girl who insisted on becoming Rui's disciple hurried over and said. Unknowingly, he had grown up a generation. Li Yi enjoyed being called martial uncle, but he still shook his head to show his refusal. Although the girl seemed to want to be Rui's disciple, her master did not agree. As the martial uncle, he could not overstep his boundaries and do things for her. Mississippi Lu did not agree, nor did she chase her away. The girl simply followed them. She did not put down the sword in her hand, but the small bag on her back was left at home. Without a third hand, when they walked to another street, Li Yi could no longer carry anything in his hands. He bought a fish from the fish shop and was going to make sweet and sour fish at home. The girl took the fish from Xiao Huan at the right time and held it in her hand, then retreated to the back without saying a word. The young maidservant glanced at her. She only knew that this young lady wanted to become the second young Miss disciple, but the second young Miss had not agreed yet. It seemed a little inappropriate to let her carry things. Just as she was about to refuse, she turned her head and saw Li Yi, who was covered in things. "Young master, let me help you carry some." She hurried over to help Li Yi. After all, Xiaohuan cared for him, unlike Mississippi Lu who was carefree and only wanted to buy the things she liked, but her hands were always empty. Since he already carried a fish, he did not mind letting her carry more things. With half of his luggage taken away, he felt much more relaxed and had the energy to think about other things. The creation of the Wulin hero ranking was naturally not done on a whim, nor did it take up too much of a factor. As for Zhao Yuanwei, he was just randomly assigned a position. It was believed that it would not be long before he was kicked off the ranking, but before that, something unexpected might happen to him. The people of the martial arts world loved fame. The brothels would try their best to perfect their information. Yesterday, Hero Wang of Anxi County carried an old man in his 80s across the river. The next day, it would become a topic of great interest to the people. Hero Zhao molested a woman in the streets of Qing and Prefecture. Within a few days, this scandal would spread throughout the martial arts world. Of course, to achieve better results, he had to pay more attention to the details. Shocking. Men would be silent while women would cry. What did Hero Qin do to cause the wrath of the heavens and the people? Was it the distortion of human nature or the degeneration of morality behind this incident? Welcome to Old Sun's commentary on Jianghu. I'll see you there tomorrow. Ancient people who had not been poisoned by the circle of friends would not be able to resist such a title. The more righteous a person was, the more they cared about their reputation. Heroes used their martial arts to break the law. Most of the evil deeds were done by people with high martial skills. As the lieutenant of a county, Li Yi had to do something to maintain the peace and order of the area under his jurisdiction. Of course, this method would not work on the infamous bandits in Jianghu who did not care about their reputation. Instead, it would spread their bad reputation even further and increase their arrogance. At this time, it was necessary to bring some positive energy to the murky Wulin. Master Zhang, who was ranked 36th on the chivalrous leaderboard, broke into a bandit's lair alone and killed more than 10 bandits with his own hands. He got rid of a big scourge in Jianghu. According to the latest strength assessment, Master Zhang's ranking rose by 2 places and became 34th on the heavenly leaderboard. The Qingzhou caravan was kidnapped by bandits. Master Chen and Master Li saw injustice and wiped out the bandits. However, they were seriously injured and almost lost their lives. This kind of selfless and fearless spirit was worth learning by everyone. Master Chen and Master Li were named as the stars of Jianghu because of this. They were one of the top 10 figures in Jianghu. The leader of the caravan rewarded them with a lot of gold for saving their lives. The magistrate of Anxi County, Lord Lu, personally came to visit. Positive news like this could be publicized more. Of course, this was a very complicated and tedious job. Old Sun and the others were still in the exploration stage. Li Yi gave them sufficient funds. Seeing how important this matter was to Li Yi, Old Sun had already assigned many people to take care of this matter. Old Sun had a very big dream. He wanted to revitalize this industry so that more and more actors and actresses could eat their fill. This dream could not be realized by himself. Li Yi had now become his hope to realize this dream. One day, their brothels would be built in other prefectures, or even the capital, or even the entire Jing kingdom. Every time he thought about this, Old Sun's old face would glow. The ranking of the chivalrous leaderboard was updated very quickly. Yesterday, Chuzhou's Xiao Yuanwei, who was ranked 40th, had 3 of his ribs broken by Qingzhou's Pound, who was ranked 41st. The next day, their rankings were switched. Those who were ranked at the bottom of the chivalrous leaderboard or those who were not on the leaderboard seemed to have found a breakthrough. They all expressed their desire to challenge Xiao Yuanwei. In view of his injuries, in the spirit of humanitarianism, everyone was willing to give him half a month to recuperate. It was said that in order to decide who would be the first to challenge, a few heroes fought. The scene was very intense. Some of them were even more seriously injured than Zhao Yuanwei. After that, the Zhao family's old house in Chuzhou became empty. More than half of the Zhao family's property was sold. Only a small portion was left for the old servants to take care of. As for Zhao Yuanwei, who was ranked 41st on the heavenly leaderboard, no one knew where he went. Wu Er was the one who told Li Yi these things. Wu Er had now become Old Sun's martial arts consultant. He received a monthly salary of 500 copper coins. All he needed to do was to ask his friends in the martial arts community to pay attention to the big and small matters in the martial arts community. The more valuable the information he provided, the more rewards he would receive. After Old Sun's team organized the information and told it to the people in the martial arts community, they received a large sum of money. A small portion of the money was used to put up rewards. It seemed that he had underestimated Old Sunday. With his efforts, this great cause was becoming more and more prosperous. Almost all the poorer actors in Anxi County had been integrated by him. Spacious brothels were also spreading to further places. Due to the declining business of ruidu and hard liquor, the family's income, which had been decreasing every day, increased again. Even Li Yi had to admit that he had underestimated the huge potential of the brothels. After lying in the courtyard for a short while, Xiao Huan had already come to complain twice. The target of her complaint was, of course, the girl named Yang Liuqing, who was still begging Rui to take her as a disciple. The girl was young, but she was very persistent. Since Rui did not agree, she would come every day before dawn to clean the courtyard, boil water, and chop firewood. After she was done with these chores, she would take a rag and wipe every place in the house until it was spotless. Most of these chores were done by Xiao Huan, but they were all snatched away by her. The servant girl had never been so free in her life. He had told her several times not to come anymore, but she never listened. She did not say a word and only knew how to work hard. Even Li Yi was a little touched by her. Young master, say something about her. She does all the chores, and Xiao Huan has nothing to do. The servant girl looked at the girl who started to clean the courtyard with a broom in dissatisfaction and said while hugging Li Yi's arm. Isn't it good to have nothing to do? Li Yi knocked her head lightly and said, go play with Sister Sue and the others. Let her do these chores if she wants to. Before Xiao Huan left, Li Xian walked in from outside and pointed at the unfamiliar girl in the courtyard suspiciously. He looked at Li Yi and asked, who is she? Is she your new concubine? Clang! With the sound of a long sword being unsheathed, a sword light slashed over. Chapter 277. Retribution for having a foul mouth always came very fast. The girl named Yang Liuqing had the temperament of a Jianghu person. If there was a disagreement, she would raise her sword. There was a reason why she chose Lu Rui as her master. Of course, she wouldn't kill him. The sword was more of a threat. Li Xian's guards didn't care whether she was threatening or really wanted to harm the crown prince. Anyone who dared to use weapons against the crown prince would be treated as an assassin. The two guards shouted. A flash of sword light flashed and collided with Yang Liuqing's sword. There was a sound of metal colliding. The girl couldn't help but take a few steps back. Li Xian's guards were all experts who were picked out of 100 or 1,000. Their strength was obviously better than Yang Liuqing's. Li Yi didn't have a clear understanding of the girl's strength. He only saw her fight with Rui. She was captured alive before she could even make one move. However, this didn't mean that she was weak. Mississippi Lu couldn't be used as a reference. Li Yi was very sure that even Li Xian's guards couldn't last one move against her. After forcing the girl to retreat, the two guards obviously didn't want to let her go. They took the opportunity to press on, as if they wanted to capture her alive. There was a sound of weapons clashing in the courtyard. Yang Liuqing had a hard time dealing with one of them. Now that there were two of them, she could only retreat. Soon, she was about to retreat into the house. Li Yi was just about to tell Li Xian to let his guards know when to stop. He couldn't blame anyone else for the sins of his mouth. Before he could say anything, the two guards' swords were broken into two. One of them had a sword on his neck. The other was shocked. When he was about to explode, the girl glanced at him coldly. It was like a bucket of cold water was poured on his head. He stood there and didn't dare to move. If you want to fight, go outside. Don't dirty the courtyard. Lu Rui said coldly and entered the house. The two guards didn't even have time to wipe the cold sweat off their foreheads. They picked up the broken weapons on the ground and immediately retreated. They didn't dare to cause trouble for the girl anymore. Just now, he didn't manage to see it clearly. He only felt a flash of light before the saber in his hand broke. Then, a saber was placed on his neck. He had always known that this woman was not simple, but today, he deeply understood how terrifying she was. If she was on the Wulin hero ranking, she would at least be in the top 5. Yang Liuqing watched as the two people who had forced him to the point where he couldn't even fight back fled like stray dogs with their tails between their legs in the blink of an eye. The determination in his eyes deepened as he watched the figure walk into the house. The two guards were chased outside by Li Xian. They lay down on Li Yi's rocking chair comfortably. The chair under them swayed with the rhythm. They couldn't help but sigh. It is said that the royal family is extravagant. In fact, the one who knows the most about extravagant enjoyment is you. Li Yi curled his lips. What kind of world was this? Sleeping in a rocking chair was extravagant. She occupied his seat and said he was extravagant. A random rosewood chair from the prince's mansion could buy dozens or hundreds of his rocking chairs. You are about to get married. Why are you running around all day? If you like it, I will give you this chair. 100 taels of silver, as usual. Yang Liuqing stared at Li Xian with an unfriendly gaze. The remaining guard behind Li Xian kept staring at her. After lying down for a long time, Li Yi stretched his waist and said lazily, "I don't have your leisure." Surprisingly, Li Xian refused, something he rarely did. He stood up from his chair and looked at Li Yi, saying, "I've been racking my brains for the past few days in the king's residence, working through the night until dawn. Finally, I've created something that can allow people to fly." "What?" Now it was Li Yi's turn to be shocked. It had only been a few days, and this guy had made an airplane. It was impossible. It was impossible for him to understand Bernoulli's principle, and it was impossible for him to know anything about aerodynamics. Unless he was God, no one could build a plane by throwing stones and leaves from the roof, let alone in this age of ignorance. Even the most primitive and simple airplane was impossible. The Wright brothers invented the first real airplane, which only appeared at the beginning of the 20th century. Compared with most of the ancient people, Li Xian was very smart, but it was impossible for him to make something that was 1,000 years ahead of time. Soon, Li Yi saw Li Xian's airplane. It turned out that the thing that could let people fly was a huge kite made of cloth. A guard of the prince's mansion ran a few times, grabbed the kite, and jumped down from the roof of the 2-story attic. After gliding in the air for more than 10 meters, he landed steadily on the ground. Li Yi blushed because he almost believed Li Xian's words. This was the thing that he made after thinking hard and staying up all night. It was just a big kite. Even if a pig was tied to it, as long as the angle was good, it would be able to glide in the air for a certain distance. The guards would be fine even if they directly jumped down from the 2-story building. They were used to going up and down, so this height was nothing to them. I think that if they jumped off the cliff, they might be able to fly even further. In the past, you said that people could fly in the sky with the help of external forces. I didn't really believe it, but now I believe it. Li Xian's expression was somewhat proud, as if he had done something very great. Hearing his words, the face of the guard who fell down from the roof turned pale. If they jumped down from the 2-story attic, they would only sprain their ankles at most. If they jumped down from the cliff, they might lose their lives. Li Yi was a bit dispirited. He had completely lost interest in Li Xian's big kite. Even if Li Xian made a glider, he might be a bit happy, but it was better than this thing without any technical content. You'd better not let them jump down from the cliff. Your guards are good at fighting skills. If one of them dies, there will be one less guard. It's not worthwhile. Don't tinker with the kite anymore. When you're free, you should study the sky-praying lantern. It's much more useful than making another big kite. Li Xian's guard looked at Li Yi as if he was looking at a savior. When His Royal Highness asked him to jump down from the cliff with the kite, he had even written his will. He tried to steal a native dog from the neighboring village and tie it to the kite. As a result, the moment he let go of the kite fell down. That dog was really miserable. If it was him, he might not be any better than that animal. However, dog meat was really delicious. He swore that it was the most delicious meat he had ever eaten in his life. Even His Royal Highness the Crown Prince was full of praises for it. Since then, the number of dogs in the prefectural city had been especially serious. Sky-praying lantern. Li Xian's attention was diverted. He rubbed his chin and started to think about what Li Yi meant. The image of the sky-praying lantern rising into the sky appeared in his mind. Li Xian was stunned, and his eyes suddenly lit up. While he was immersed in his own world, Li Yi planned to go home for dinner. A while ago, Li Xian was still having a headache about his marriage. These few days, he was in the mood to hide at home and make plans. It seemed like he had completely accepted his fate. An arranged marriage was not acceptable. From the looks of it, he seemed to be planning to dedicate his life to science. After a short moment of silence for his future wife, he could see his own house. A figure was pacing back and forth at the entrance of the house. He kept rubbing his hands and looked very anxious. Li Yi walked over and asked, "Old son, what's wrong? Did something happen at the theater?" "Young master, you're finally back." Old son let out a long sigh of relief. Li Yi was his backbone. He only felt confident when he saw him. It's not just the theater. Our brothel outside is also in trouble. Chapter 278. I heard that there is a new play in the brothel outside the city. It's called A Chinese Ghost Story. It's better than The Painted Skin. Do you want to watch it together? I've seen it a long time ago. The theater in the city opened 2 days ago. It's a little slower outside the city. This time, I came to listen to old Zhao talk about Wulin. At the entrance of a tile-roofed house outside the city, 2 men greeted each other with a smile and walked in side by side. I want to watch A Chinese Ghost Story, but I'm afraid I can't today. I just came from there. The brothel is closed today. I'll come back early tomorrow. A person who came out of the house reminded them. It's closed. Why? What's wrong with those people? They don't want to earn money. People who like to watch plays and listen to songs inside and outside the prefectural city were surprised to find that the recently built brothels were all closed today. Those who wanted to watch new plays and listen to Wulin stories suddenly had nowhere to go. They could only go back home after cursing for a while. In the city, the well-received Chongping Street Theater also hung up a sign that it was closed today, making countless people leave in disappointment. At this time, in the theater, a few managers of the brothels outside the city gathered there, frowning. "Miss Wan, we can't just close like this. These days, A Chinese Ghost Story is very popular. If we don't open for a day, we will lose 5 strings of coins." A gray-haired old man said with a sad face. As soon as the old man finished speaking, everyone's eyes were on the only woman present. On the surface, it was old Sun who was in charge, but they all knew that Miss Wan was actually the one who had the most say when it came to big things. Before Wan Ruoqing could say anything, another old man slammed the table. His beard trembled as he said, "These despicable ***stards. It's not easy for the children to have enough to eat, and now they're plotting against us. We can't hand over the script. It's more important than our lives. They want to buy it just because they have money. This is robbery. Anyway, I don't have many years to live. Even if I have to risk my old life, I will splash their blood." Wan Ruoqing hurriedly said, "Don't worry, Mr. Qian. No one wants to hand over the script. No one wants to give it to them. Mr. Sun is going to solve this problem. He will not let those people succeed." Wan Ruoqing said. "It's difficult." The old man who spoke first sighed and said, "We have no power or influence. What can we use to fight against them? Those children are still lying inside." As soon as the old man finished speaking, everyone saw old man Sun accompanying a young man walking over from the back door. "How's the injured?" The young man walked over and asked directly. Everyone looked at the young man with a hint of doubt in their eyes. After looking at old Sun, they seemed to understand something, and their expressions changed. Wan Ruoqing came over and said, "We've already sent for a doctor. They only suffered superficial wounds. It's not a big deal. One of them broke 2 ribs and may need some time to recover." Li Yi asked again, "Who did it? Did you find out?" "They are all famous ruffians in the city. They said that since we are in their territory and under their protection, we should give them money as compensation. We didn't want to provoke them and wanted to send them away with some copper coins. We didn't expect them to ask for 10 coins as soon as they opened their mouth. They also said that they would come to ask for it once a day. Dongzi and the others only argued with them for a while before they were injured. This time, it was the gray-haired old man who spoke. His tone was very respectful. Seeing Old Man's son and Miss Wan's attitude toward this young man, he knew that this young man was the benefactor who gave them a living. So, he told them the whole story in full detail. "Why didn't you report it to the authorities?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. Qing and Prefecture and even Anxi County had been divided into small districts by him. Each district had a special person in charge, who was responsible for fighting and bullying the good. When he was working under County Magistrate Zhou, he didn't care what the bailiffs and bailiffs did. In order to fulfill the agreement with Her Royal Highness, before he left the Yamen, he restrained those guys a lot. If there was any dereliction of duty or bullying the common people, he didn't have to do anything himself. Louis Shui would make them pay for it. The old man shook his head and said, "We can't report it to the authorities. Those ruffians often enter the Yamen. If they are caught and locked up for a few days at most, when they come out, we will be the unlucky ones. Moreover, this time they were ordered by someone to make us hand over the script. We are all doing this for a living. Those people are so cruel." Everyone, including Old Man's son, had worried expressions on their faces. The authorities wouldn't care about the life and death of these lowly actors. With the power of those people, if they really reported it to the authorities, they would be even more unlucky. They finally had something to look forward to. Were they going to walk into the abyss again? Old Son's old face showed strong unwillingness. He seemed to have aged a few more years. Other than Li Yi, the one who was least worried was Ruoqing. Because only she knew that the person behind them wasn't just a weak scholar. In Ning Wangfu, he had reprimanded the new Jinshi in front of so many officials. He had offended many people, but he was fine. On the other hand, Cui Yanxin and Jiang Zi hadn't been appointed by the imperial court. Their careers hadn't even started, but they had already reached the end. Old Sun and Old Qian were worried that after reporting it to the authorities, those ruffians would take revenge. Little did they know that the person those ruffians and idlers should be most afraid of was him. "Go back. Everything will return to normal. Do what you need to do. I will take care of these things." After Li Yi spoke, everyone looked troubled. Before the matter was resolved, those people wouldn't give up. As soon as they opened the door to perform, those ruffians would definitely follow. Before they could ask what they were worried about, a group of people suddenly rushed in from behind. The man in the lead cracked his knuckles and asked excitedly, "Young master, who are we looking for trouble this time?" In the morning, the doors of the theater and the brothel were still tightly closed. In the afternoon, they opened their doors to welcome the guests. There were still a few days before the new year. The New Year's goods had been bought. More and more people had nothing to do at home. If people were idle all the time, they would get sick. Therefore, many people would find something to do in these days. The brothel was a good place to go, especially the newly built ones. They attracted the attention of many people. They were already tired of those old things. Only something fresh like a Chinese ghost story could please them. Although there were two men who looked extraordinary in the theater, Old Man's son didn't feel relieved at all. He glanced at the young man who was chatting with Miss Wan and could only sigh. So what if he could chase those ruffians away? He could chase them away once or twice. Could he chase them away countless times? They would always make a comeback. What should he do when that time came? Moreover, those ruffians who were looking for trouble weren't the main point. Those who were interested in the script were the ones who should have a headache. Old Man's son patted his swollen head and an arrogant laugh was heard. "Old man, business is good. Have you raised enough money?" "I always keep my word. If you can take out 10 strings of money, I will leave immediately and come back tomorrow." You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.